The Infinite Mirror, a journey through the architecture of thought. Chapter 1: The Shadow on the Wall. The history of human thought begins not with a discovery of what is there, but with a realization of what might be missing. We find the most enduring metaphor for this realization in the works of Plato, written over 2,000 years ago in the heart of Athens. To understand the world, Plato suggests we must first understand our own limitations. He invites us to imagine an underground chamber, a cave, where a group of prisoners has lived since childhood. These individuals are chained by their legs and necks, forced to face a single stone wall. They cannot turn their heads to see the entrance behind them, nor can they see each other. They know only the wall. Behind these prisoners, higher up and further back, a fire is burning. Between the fire and the prisoners, there is a raised path along which people carry various objects, statues of animals, figures of men, and tools of every kind. As these travelers move, the firelight casts the shapes of these objects onto the wall in front of the prisoners. This is their entire universe. They hear the echoes of voices reflecting off the stone and attribute those sounds to the shadows they see. They hold competitions to see who can most accurately name the shapes or predict which shadow will appear next. For these prisoners, the shadows are not mere reflections. They are the absolute, undeniable truth of reality. There is no reason for them to suspect that anything else exists. This condition of the cave is, according to Plato, the standard condition of the human soul. We are born into a world of sensory perceptions, colors, sounds, textures, and emotions, and we naturally assume that these things represent the ultimate reality. We compete for honors, wealth, and status based on these shadows, never realizing that we are looking at the lowest level of existence. The cave represents the physical world, the realm of appearances that is constantly changing and decaying. The shadows represent our opinions and the superficial information we receive through our eyes and ears. The narrative shifts when one prisoner is suddenly released from his bonds. He stands up, turns his head, and walks toward the light. This movement is not easy, it is painful. His eyes, accustomed to a lifetime of darkness, are blinded by the fire. He is confused and distressed. If he were told that what he saw before were mere illusions and that he was now closer to the truth, he would likely retreat to the comfort of the shadows. This is a crucial psychological insight. The truth is often more uncomfortable than a familiar lie. Growth requires the endurance of disorientation. As the prisoner is dragged out of the cave and into the world above, the pain intensifies. The sun, the ultimate source of light, is at first impossible to look at. He must start by looking at shadows on the ground, then at reflections in the water, and eventually at the trees and stars at night. Only after a long period of habituation can he look at the sun itself. In this moment, he realizes that the sun is the cause of the seasons, the guardian of the visible world, and in a way, the source of everything he and his fellow prisoners had ever perceived. This sun represents the form of the good, the highest principle of truth and reason. In Plato's metaphysics, every object in our world is just a flawed copy of an eternal, perfect form. For example, every chair we see in the physical world is imperfect. It will eventually break or rot. But the idea or form of a chair is perfect and eternal. To truly understand the universe, we must move beyond the particulars of the physical world and grasp the universals of the intellectual world. The tragedy of the allegory occurs when the enlightened man decides to return to the cave to help his friends. When he re-enters the darkness, his eyes are no longer adjusted to the gloom. He stumbles and can no longer identify the shadows as well as those who never left. The other prisoners mock him. They conclude that his journey into the light has ruined his eyesight and that the world outside is a dangerous, delusional place. They vow that if anyone ever tries to lead them out, they would kill him. This was Plato's thinly veiled reference to the execution of his teacher, Socrates, who was put to death by the citizens of Athens for trying to wake them from their intellectual slumber. The shadow on the wall serves as a permanent warning to the modern mind. In our contemporary world, the cave has taken on new forms. We might see the fire as the glow of a television or a smartphone screen, and the shadows as the carefully curated images and narratives fed to us by media and algorithms. We are still, in many ways, naming shadows and mistaking them for the substance of life. The challenge remains the same: to have the courage to turn around, to endure the blinding light of new information, and to seek the forms, the underlying principles of logic, math, and ethics that remain true even when the shadows flicker and fade. To study philosophy is to begin the ascent out of the cave. It is the recognition that the world is not always as it appears, and that the pursuit of truth is a journey from the visible to the intelligible. It is an invitation to stop being a spectator of shadows and to become a witness to the light. Chapter 2: The Architect of Doubt. The transition from the ancient world of Plato to the dawn of the 17th century represents more than just a passage of time. It marks a fundamental shift in the location of truth. If the ancient Greeks looked outward toward the eternal forms of the universe, the modern era began when one man decided to look inward, into the very mechanism of the human mind. This man was René Descartes. To read Descartes is to witness the birth of the self, as the primary lens through which reality is interpreted. In this chapter, we explore his Meditations on First Philosophy, a work that sought to tear down the crumbling house of medieval scholasticism and rebuild human knowledge on a foundation that was absolutely unshakable. Descartes began his journey in a state of profound intellectual crisis. He looked at the science, the theology, and the philosophy of his day, and saw a chaotic mess of conflicting opinions. He realized that he had accepted a vast number of false beliefs as true during his childhood, and that the entire superstructure he had built upon those weak foundations was highly suspect. He decided that if he wanted to establish anything firm and lasting in the sciences, he had to rid himself of all his previous opinions and begin again from the very bottom. He did not seek to find a million small truths. He sought one single, indubitable truth, an Archimedean point upon which he could pivot the entire world. To achieve this, Descartes employed a method of radical doubt. This was not the doubt of a cynic who believes nothing can be known, but the doubt of a builder testing the strength of a stone. He resolved to treat any belief that held even the slightest spark of uncertainty as if it were totally false. He began by attacking the senses. Most of what we believe about the world comes from what we see, hear, smell, and touch. Yet, as Descartes noted, the senses are notoriously deceptive. A stick looks bent when submerged in water. A distant tower looks round when it is actually square. If a friend lies to you once, you might forgive them, but you would never fully trust them again. Why then should we trust the senses that have deceived us countless times? He pushed his doubt even further. He considered the phenomenon of dreaming. Have you ever had a dream so vivid, so visceral, that you were convinced of its reality while you were in it? In a dream, you feel the warmth of the sun and the weight of your own body. It is only upon waking that you realize the entire world was a fabrication of your mind. Descartes asked a haunting question: how can we be certain at this very moment that we are not dreaming? There are no certain marks by which the state of waking can be distinguished from the state of sleep. This thought experiment effectively dissolved the entire physical world. The trees, the stars, the ground beneath our feet, all of it could be a dream image, a mental projection with no external reality. Yet Descartes found that even in dreams, certain things remained true. Whether I am awake or asleep, 2 + 3 = 5, and a square has 4 sides. These mathematical truths seemed more robust than sensory ones. To challenge even these, Descartes introduced his most famous and terrifying thought experiment, the malicious demon. He imagined that the universe was not governed by a benevolent God, but by a powerful and cunning deceiver who dedicated all his energies to misleading Descartes. This demon could make him believe there is an earth, a sky, and a body, when none of those things exist. More importantly, this demon could trick him every time he tried to add 2 and 3, making him perceive a mathematical certainty where there was only a lie. At this point in the narrative, Descartes has reached the absolute floor of skepticism. He has no body, no world, no mathematics, and no God. He is a mind floating in a void of total uncertainty, but it is precisely at this moment of maximum despair that he discovers his first certainty. He realizes that even if the demon is deceiving him, the demon cannot bring it about that he is nothing, so long as he thinks he is something. To be deceived, one must exist. To doubt, one must think. Even if every thought in his head is a lie, the fact that he is having those thoughts is an undeniable truth. This led to the immortal phrase, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. This was the bedrock. It was the only statement that the malicious demon could not subvert. Even if I am wrong about everything else, I cannot be wrong about the fact that I am a thinking thing. This discovery, however, created a new problem, the Cartesian circle. Descartes had proved his own existence, but he was still trapped inside his own mind. He was a subject looking out at a world he could no longer prove was there. To bridge this gap, he turned to the concept of the mind as a thinking substance, res cogitans, and the body as an extended substance, res extensa. This is known as Cartesian dualism. Descartes argued that the mind and the body are two completely different types of things. The mind is invisible, weightless, and lacks physical dimensions, while the body is a machine that takes up space and follows the laws of physics. This separation of mind and matter had a profound impact on the development of Western science. By defining the physical world as extended matter, governed by mechanical laws, Descartes stripped the universe of its mysterious, spiritual souls and turned it into a giant clockwork mechanism that could be studied, measured, and mastered. However, this left us with the mind-body problem, a mystery that still plagues philosophy and neuroscience today. If the mind and body are different substances, how do they interact? How does the ghost of a thought move the machine of the muscles? Descartes famously guessed that the interaction happened in the pineal gland, a tiny organ in the brain, but this was more of a desperate guess than a logical solution. The legacy of the architect of doubt is the elevation of the individual consciousness. Descartes shifted the focus of human inquiry from what is the world to what can I know. He taught us that the first step toward wisdom is the courage to question everything we take for granted. He showed us that even in a world of illusions, simulations, and deceptions, there is a core of identity that remains untouchable. We are, at our most fundamental level, witnesses. We are the observers of the theater of the mind, and that observation is the only thing that proves we are real. As we close this chapter, we are left with a world divided. On one side, the internal world of the I, which is certain but isolated. On the other side, the external world of matter, which is vast but potentially illusory. The bridge between the two would be the next great challenge for the thinkers who followed him, leading us from the isolation of the mind into the vibrant, messy world of human experience. Chapter 3: The Blank Slate. If René Descartes was the architect who built a fortress around the human mind, then John Locke and the British empiricists were the scouts who insisted on opening the gates and stepping back into the light of the physical world. In the previous chapter, we witnessed the birth of the thinking thing, a mind that found certainty by doubting everything outside of itself, but this left philosophy in a lonely place. It created a solipsistic tension where the only thing we could truly prove was our own existence. Chapter 3 marks the great counter-revolution, the rise of empiricism. This is the belief that knowledge is not something we are born with, nor something we find through pure logic alone, but something that is written onto us by the world through the medium of our senses. Imagine a room that is perfectly dark and perfectly empty. There are no colors, no sounds, no textures, and no ideas. This, according to John Locke, is the state of the human mind at the moment of birth. He famously described the mind as a tabula rasa, a blank slate or a clean piece of white paper. While Descartes believed that certain ideas, like the idea of God or the laws of mathematics, were innate or pre-programmed into the soul by a creator, Locke found this notion absurd. He argued that if humans had innate ideas, then every child and every person across every culture would naturally agree on them. Yet, a child does not know that 2 + 2 = 4 until they are taught to count. and different civilizations hold vastly different views on the nature of divinity. For Locke, the primary source of all our knowledge is experience. This experience is divided into two categories: sensation and reflection. Sensation is the outward-facing window of the mind. It is the process by which our eyes perceive the yellow of a sunflower, our ears hear the crash of a wave, and our skin feels the chill of the wind. These sensations are the raw materials of thought. Reflection, on the other hand, is the mind's inward-facing window. It is the process by which the mind looks at the sensations it has received and begins to compare them, combine them, and reason about them. Think of the mind as a master weaver. Sensation provides the colorful threads, but the mind performs the act of weaving those threads into the complex tapestry of our beliefs. Without the threads of sensation, the weaver would have nothing to work with, but without the act of reflection, the threads would remain a disorganized heap of colors. However, this raises a troubling question that leads us deeper into the heart of the empiricist challenge. If all our knowledge comes from our senses, how do we know if our senses are actually telling us the truth about the objects themselves? To answer this, Locke introduced a distinction between primary and secondary qualities. Primary qualities are those that are inseparable from the object itself, no matter how it is perceived. These include solidity, extension, figure, and motion. If you have a block of wood, it has a specific shape and size whether you are looking at it or not. These qualities are objective. Secondary qualities, however, are more elusive. These are things like color, sound, taste, and smell. Locke argued that these do not actually exist inside the objects. Rather, they are powers that the objects have to produce certain sensations in us. A red apple is not red in the dark. Redness is a sensation created in your mind when light of a certain wavelength bounces off the apple and hits your eye. If the human race were to suddenly go blind, redness would cease to exist, even though the apple's shape and size would remain. This was a revolutionary and slightly unsettling idea. It suggests that a large portion of the reality we experience, the beauty of a sunset, the sweetness of honey, the melody of a song, lives only within our own consciousness. This path of inquiry was pushed to its most radical conclusion by an Irish philosopher named George Berkeley. Berkeley looked at Locke's distinction and asked a piercing question. If we can only know an object through our sensations of it, how can we be sure that the primary qualities, like shape and size, exist outside the mind either? Berkeley argued that we never actually perceive the matter of a block of wood. We only perceive the hardness, the brown color, and the rectangular shape. If you take away all the qualities that are perceived by the mind, what is left? Berkeley's answer was nothing. This led to his famous maxim, esse est percipi, to be is to be perceived. In Berkeley's view, the material world does not exist as a physical substance at all. Instead, the universe is a collection of ideas held in the mind of an infinite observer, God. While this may sound like a descent into madness, it was a logical extension of the empiricist claim that we can only know what we experience. If we experience only ideas, then perhaps reality itself is made of ideas. The final and most devastating blow to human certainty in this era came from the Scottish philosopher David Hume. Hume took the empiricist method and applied it with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. He wanted to know where our ideas about cause and effect came from. We see one billiard ball hit another, and the second one moves. We assume that the first ball caused the second to move, but Hume pointed out that we never actually see cause. We see the first ball move, we see the contact, and we see the second ball move. Our minds fill in the gap with the idea of causation, because we have seen it happen many times before. Hume argued that our belief in cause and effect is not based on reason or a law of the universe, but on custom or habit. We are biologically wired to expect the future to resemble the past. We expect the sun to rise tomorrow not because we can prove it must, but because it always has. This realization was a skeptical crisis. If cause and effect cannot be proven, then the very foundations of science and daily life are based on a psychological instinct rather than an objective truth. Furthermore, Hume turned his gaze toward the self. the very I that Descartes was so certain of. When Hume looked inward to find his self, he found only a bundle or collection of different perceptions which succeed each other with an inconceivable rapidity. He found memories of yesterday, the feeling of his chair, a lingering thought about dinner, and a flash of anxiety. But he never found a permanent, unchanging self that was having those experiences. To Hume, the self was like a theatre where different actors come and go, but the theatre itself is empty. This journey from Locke's blank slate to Hume's bundle of perceptions represents a profound humbling of the human ego. We went from being masters of a certain reality to being travellers in a world where we can only be sure of our immediate sensations. We are forced to admit that our knowledge is limited. Our self is a fluid stream of experiences, and our understanding of the universe is built on habits of the mind rather than the iron laws of logic. Yet, this shift also opened the door to a more grounded, scientific approach to life. By focusing on what we can observe and measure, rather than what we can imagine in the abstract, the empiricists laid the groundwork for the modern age. They taught us that while we may never have the absolute certainty of a god, we have the practical tools of a human. We learn by doing, by seeing, and by failing. We are not born with the answers. We are born with the capacity to ask the questions and the courage to look at the world until it begins to speak back to us. As we move into the next chapter, we will see how a philosopher named Immanuel Kant tried to heal the rift between Descartes, logic, and Hume's experience, attempting to build a bridge that would finally allow us to stand on solid ground once again. Chapter 4: The Categorical Imperative. The intellectual landscape of the 18th century was a battlefield of fractured ideas. On one side stood the rationalists, followers of Descartes, who believed that the mind could unlock the secrets of the universe through pure logic, detached from the messy world of the senses. On the other side stood the empiricists, led by the ghost of David Hume, who had effectively dismantled the bridge between the mind and reality, suggesting that we are merely bundles of habits and sensations with no access to objective truth. Into this crisis stepped Immanuel Kant, a man of such legendary discipline that the people of his hometown, Königsberg, were said to set their watches by his daily walks. Kant realized that if philosophy were to survive, it needed a Copernican revolution. He proposed that instead of our minds conforming to the world, as we experience it, conforms to the structure of our minds. But Kant's greatest contribution was not limited to the mechanics of how we see trees or mountains. It was his monumental effort to find a foundation for morality that was as certain as the laws of mathematics. He sought to answer the most pressing question of the human soul: what ought I to do? Before Kant, morality was often tied to either religious command or the pursuit of happiness. People did good because they feared God, or because they believed it would lead to a pleasant life. But Kant found these motivations to be fragile and heteronomous, meaning they were dictated by outside forces. If you are only kind because you want to go to heaven, or because it makes you feel good, you aren't actually being moral, you are simply being strategic. You are treating goodness as a tool to get something else. For Kant, a truly moral act must be done out of duty alone, and its value must come from the intention behind it, not the consequences that follow. To find this universal law, Kant developed his most famous concept, the categorical imperative. The word categorical means it applies in every situation, without exception. The word imperative means it is a command that must be followed. Unlike a hypothetical imperative, which says, if you want X then do Y, the categorical imperative simply says, do Y. It is a law given by reason to itself. Kant provided several formulations of this law, but the first is the most striking. Act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. To understand this, imagine you are in a difficult financial situation and you consider taking a loan you know you cannot repay. You might tell yourself a white lie to get the money. Kant asks you to run a mental simulation. What if everyone followed the rule that it is okay to make a lying promise when in need? If that became a universal law, the very concept of a promise would dissolve. No one would believe anyone else, and the system of lending would collapse. Therefore, the action is logically inconsistent and morally wrong. It is not wrong because it hurts people, which is a consequence. It is wrong because it contradicts reason itself. This brings us to the second formulation of the categorical imperative, often called the formula of humanity. Act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never merely as a means to an end, but always at the same time as an end. This is perhaps the most profound sentence in the history of ethics. To treat someone as a means is to use them like a tool, a hammer to drive a nail or a servant to bring you food. While we use people's services every day, Kant insists that we must never merely use them. We must always recognize their inherent dignity and their own capacity for reason and choice. This is the philosophical foundation for human rights. It forbids slavery, exploitation, and manipulation, because each human being is a legislator in the kingdom of ends. We are all sovereign creators of value, and to override someone else's will for your own benefit is to commit a crime against the very nature of rationality. Kant's ethics are famously rigorous. He believed that moral laws like do not lie have no exceptions. He famously argued that if a murderer came to your door asking for the location of a friend they intended to kill, you would still be duty-bound not to lie. While this seems extreme to the modern ear, it highlights Kant's commitment to the purity of the will. He believed that we cannot control the world, nor can we predict the consequences of our actions with total accuracy. The only thing we have absolute control over is our good will. If you do your duty because it is your duty, you have achieved a moral victory that no amount of bad luck can take away from you. This leads to the concept of autonomy. For Kant, to be free does not mean doing whatever you want. That is just being a slave to your desires and instincts. True freedom is the ability to give a law to yourself. When you choose to follow the categorical imperative, you are not obeying an external master. You are obeying your own highest faculty, reason. You are rising above your animal nature and participating in a universal order. However, Kant was not blind to the tragedy of human life. He realized that in our world, the good people often suffer while the wicked flourish. This creates a tension in our reason. Why should we be moral if there is no guarantee of justice? To solve this, Kant introduced the postulates of practical reason. He argued that while we cannot prove that God exists or that the soul is immortal, we must act as if they are true in order for morality to make sense. We must hope for a summum bonum, or a highest good, where virtue and happiness are eventually united. The legacy of the categorical imperative is the elevation of human dignity above all else. It challenges us to look past our selfish interests and ask, what if everyone did what I am about to do? It forces us to see the humanity in the stranger, the enemy, and the marginalized. It is a philosophy of cold, hard logic that somehow results in a world of profound respect and equality. In an age of moral relativism, where many believe that right and wrong are just matters of opinion or culture, Kant stands as a towering lighthouse. He reminds us that if we are truly rational beings, there are certain lines we can never cross. We are the architects of our own character, and the laws we choose to live by define the very boundaries of our world. As we look into the infinite mirror of our own minds, Kant asks us to ensure that the person looking back is someone who lives by a law that the entire universe could follow. Chapter 5: The Greatest Good. In the previous chapter, we stood atop the cold, crystalline peaks of Kantian ethics, where the moral law is absolute, unchanging, and indifferent to the messy outcomes of the world. We learned that to be moral is to follow a duty dictated by reason, regardless of whether that duty leads to a smile or a tear. But as we descend from those heights, we enter a different landscape, one defined by the heat of human emotion, the reality of suffering, and the tangible pursuit of happiness. This is the domain of utilitarianism. If Kant's philosophy is a lighthouse of right, utilitarianism is a searchlight for good. It shifts our gaze from the hidden intentions of the heart to the visible consequences in the world. It asks a deceptively simple question. If a moral system does not strive to reduce pain and increase joy, what is it actually for? The story of the greatest good begins in the late 18th century with a radical eccentric named Jeremy Bentham. Bentham was a man of the Enlightenment who had a deep-seated disdain for what he called nonsense upon stilts, his term for the abstract natural rights and social contracts that philosophers had debated for centuries. To Bentham, morality was not a matter of divine decree or metaphysical duty. It was a matter of mathematics and biology. He famously declared that nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. Everything we do, every choice we make, is ultimately an attempt to seek the latter and avoid the former. Bentham proposed the principle of utility, which states that the most ethical action is the one that produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number. To make this practical, he developed what he called the philosophic calculus. This was a literal formula designed to measure the amount of pleasure an action would produce. It looked at 7 variables: intensity, duration, certainty, propinquity, how soon it will happen, fecundity, if it will lead to more pleasure, purity, if it is mixed with pain, and extent, how many people are affected. In Bentham's view, there was no higher or lower pleasure. He famously remarked that, prejudice apart, the game of pushpin is of equal value with the arts and sciences of music and poetry, if the game of pushpin furnish as much pleasure. To Bentham, a happy pig was just as valuable as a happy philosopher, provided the levels of pleasure were equal. This radical egalitarianism was both the strength and the scandal of Bentham's system. It stripped away the snobbery of the elite and the dogmas of the church, but it left many feeling that something essential was missing. If morality is just a calculator of pleasure, does it not reduce humanity to mere pleasure machines? Enter John Stuart Mill, Bentham's protégé and the man who would refine utilitarianism into a sophisticated moral framework. Mill was a child prodigy who suffered a nervous breakdown in his 20s, partly due to the rigid, emotionless education Bentham had designed for him. Through his recovery, Mill discovered the power of poetry and the arts, leading him to realize that Bentham's pushpin philosophy was too narrow. Mill agreed that happiness was the ultimate end, but he argued that not all pleasures are created equal. Mill introduced the distinction between higher and lower pleasures. He argued that human beings have faculties that are more elevated than animal appetites. The pleasures of the intellect, of the imagination, and of the moral sentiments have a much higher value than the pleasures of mere sensation. He famously wrote, "It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied, better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. And if the fool or the pig are of a different opinion, it is because they only know their own side of the question." By adding quality to the quantity of pleasure, Mill moved utilitarianism away from simple hedonism and toward a vision of human flourishing. To see utilitarianism in action, we must look at the trolley problems, those famous thought experiments that test the limits of our moral intuition. Imagine a runaway trolley hurtling down a track toward 5 workers who cannot escape. You stand by a lever. If you pull it, the trolley switches to a different track where only one person is standing. Do you pull the lever? For a strict utilitarian, the answer is a clear yes. 5 lives are worth more than 1. The greatest good is achieved by minimizing the loss. However, this logic leads into dark territory. What if you are a surgeon with 5 patients who will die without organ transplants and 1 healthy traveler walks into your clinic? Should you kill the traveler to harvest their organs and save the 5? Mathematically, the result is the same as the trolley problem: 5 lives saved for 1 lost. Yet, almost everyone feels a deep moral revulsion at this idea. This is the utility versus justice problem. If the goal is simply the greatest total happiness, does that mean we can sacrifice individuals or minorities for the sake of the majority? Can we justify the slavery of a few if it provides immense wealth and comfort to the many? To address this, philosophers developed rule utilitarianism. While act utilitarianism looks at each individual action, like the surgeon's choice, and asks if it produces the most happiness, rule utilitarianism asks what rules would produce the most happiness if everyone followed them. A society where surgeons could kill healthy travelers for organs would be a society of terror and chaos. No one would ever go to the hospital. Therefore, a rule like never kill an innocent person actually produces more long-term utility than the act of saving those 5 patients. Through rule utilitarianism, Mill and his successors tried to weave a sense of justice and individual rights back into the fabric of the greatest good. The power of utilitarianism lies in its practicality and its focus on the expanding circle. Unlike ancient ethics that often focused on my family, my tribe, or my city, utilitarianism is inherently universal. In the calculus of pleasure and pain, every sentient being counts as one, and no one counts as more than one. This has made it the primary driver of social reform for 2 centuries. It was the philosophical engine behind the abolition of slavery, the rise of women's suffrage, and the modern animal rights movement. If an animal can suffer, then its pain must be factored into the moral equation. This sentientist view challenges us to look beyond our own species and consider the total suffering footprint of our lives. In the modern era, utilitarianism has evolved into effective altruism, the movement to use evidence and reason to do the most good possible. It asks us to consider not just our intentions, but the actual data. If donating $100 to a local charity saves 0 lives, but donating $100 to a malaria net foundation in a developing country saves 1 life, then the latter is the only moral choice. It is a philosophy of the head serving the heart, demanding that we be as rigorous in our kindness as we are in our business. Yet, the shadow of the system remains. Critics argue that utilitarianism is too demanding, asking us to be impartial spectators who care as much about a stranger across the ocean as we do about our own children. They argue it turns us into moral accountants, constantly tallying up the costs of our coffee or our vacations against the lives they could have saved. Furthermore, there is the problem of the experience machine, a thought experiment by Robert Nozick. If we could plug into a machine that gave us a lifetime of perfect, simulated pleasure, would we? Most people say no. They want to do things and be certain people, not just feel the sensation of it. This suggests that happiness, in the sense of pleasure, might not be the greatest good after all. As we conclude this chapter, we are left with a powerful, if imperfect, tool. Utilitarianism forces us to take responsibility for the world we create. It strips away the excuses of tradition or gut feeling and demands that we justify our choices by the real-world impact they have on living beings. It reminds us that while we may never reach a state of perfect harmony, the reduction of even a single unit of pain is a victory worth pursuing. The infinite mirror of thought now reflects a world of interconnected lives, where my happiness is bound up in yours, and where the greatest good is not a destination, but a constant, calculating, and compassionate journey. Chapter 6: The Death of God. The 19th century was a time of iron and steam, of burgeoning empires and the relentless march of scientific discovery. But beneath the surface of industrial progress, a profound tectonic shift was occurring in the human psyche. For centuries, the infinite mirror of philosophy had reflected a world centered on a divine architect, a source of absolute morality, purpose, and truth. Whether it was Plato's form of the good, Descartes' perfect being, or Kant's moral legislator, the Western mind had always anchored its values in a transcendent reality. But in the late 1800s, a man with a thunderous intellect and a tragic life stepped forward to announce that the anchor had been cut. That man was Friedrich Nietzsche, and his announcement would shatter the foundations of Western civilization. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. To understand Nietzsche, we must first understand that his declaration was not a celebration of atheism. but a terrifying diagnosis of a cultural catastrophe. In his work The Gay Science, Nietzsche tells the parable of a madman who runs into a marketplace in the bright morning hours, carrying a lighted lantern, crying out, "I seek God, I seek God." The bystanders, who no longer believe in God but still live in the comfort of their old traditions, laugh at him. But the madman turns on them, declaring that we have unchained the earth from its sun. He asks, "Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all suns, are we not plunging continually? Backward, sideward, forward in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing?" This is the essence of nihilism, the belief that life has no intrinsic meaning or value. Nietzsche realized that if you remove the divine foundation of reality, you don't just lose religion, you lose the basis for your concepts of right and wrong, truth and falsehood, and purpose and vanity. If there is no objective designer, then the universe is indifferent to our suffering and our triumphs. We are left alone in a cold, silent cosmos, drifting through an infinite nothing. Nietzsche feared that this realization would lead to a collapse of the human spirit, resulting in a state he called the last man, a creature who seeks only comfort, avoids all risk, and has lost the capacity to dream or create. However, Nietzsche did not stop at the diagnosis. He believed that the death of God, while terrifying, was also the greatest opportunity in history. It was a clearing of the horizon. If we have killed the old gods, we are now tasked with becoming gods ourselves to appear worthy of the deed. We must move from being reactors to life to being creators of life. This journey begins with the revaluation of all values. Nietzsche argued that the dominant moral system of his time, specifically Christian morality, was what he called a slave morality. He believed it was born out of ressentiment, a deep-seated resentment felt by the weak toward the strong. In ancient times, good was synonymous with noble, powerful, and beautiful. But according to Nietzsche, the oppressed classes inverted this. They declared that the powerful were evil and that the weak, the humble, and the suffering were good. He saw this as a life-denying philosophy, one that suppressed human excellence and vitality in favor of a herd mentality. To move forward, humanity had to rediscover master morality, a life-affirming system that values strength, creativity, and the courage to define one's own truth. At the heart of this new philosophy is the will to power. For Nietzsche, the fundamental drive of all living things is not merely to survive, as Darwin suggested, but to expand, to overcome, and to manifest power. This is not necessarily a call for political tyranny, rather it is a psychological and spiritual imperative. A great artist exerts will to power over their canvas, a thinker exerts it over their own doubts. It is the drive to become more, to transcend one's current state, and to impose order on the chaos of existence. This leads us to the most famous and controversial of Nietzsche's concepts, the Übermensch or the Overman. If the last man is the end of the line for a decaying culture, the Übermensch is the beginning of a new one. Nietzsche's character Zarathustra declares, "Man is a rope stretched between the animal and the Übermensch, a rope over an abyss." The Übermensch is the individual who has transcended the herd, who has faced the void of nihilism and emerged not with despair, but with a laughter that creates. They do not look to the heavens for meaning, they give meaning to the earth. They are the ones who write their own table of values and live by them with absolute integrity. But how do we know if we have truly created values that are worthy? Nietzsche proposed a final, ultimate test, the eternal recurrence. Imagine a demon creeps into your loneliest loneliness and tells you that you must live this life. Every pain, every joy, every mundane moment, over and over again for all eternity in exactly the same sequence. Would you fall to the ground and curse the demon? Or would you say, "You are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine"? To be able to say yes to the eternal recurrence is the highest form of life affirmation. It means you have lived a life so authentic and so powerful that you would choose to repeat it forever, exactly as it is. Nietzsche's philosophy is a philosophy of the hammer. It seeks to smash the idols of the past to see which ones are hollow and which ones might still ring true. It is a dangerous, intoxicating path that places a tremendous burden on the individual. Without a God to guide us, we are the ones responsible for the up and down of our world. We are the architects of our own salvation or our own destruction. Critics often point out that Nietzsche's ideas are easily distorted, and indeed they were tragically co-opted by the Nazi regime long after his death, a perversion of his work that ignored his disdain for antisemitism and German nationalism. But the core of Nietzsche's challenge remains: in a world without inherent meaning, do you have the strength to create your own? Can you face the infinite nothing and respond with a will to power that makes life a work of art? As we close the curtain on the 19th century, we leave behind the comfort of the absolute and step into the 20th century, a century that would see Nietzsche's prophecies of great wars and upheavals come true. We move toward a world where the search for meaning becomes more desperate, more personal, and more radical than ever before. The infinite mirror is now broken into 1,000 shards, and each of us must pick up a piece and decide what it will reflect. Chapter 7: Existence Precedes Essence. The year was 1945. The world was emerging from the most horrific display of human cruelty and mechanical destruction in history. Europe lay in literal and metaphorical rubble. The grand narratives of progress, the comforting structures of religion, and even the rationalist hope that human nature was inherently good had all been vaporized in the fires of the Holocaust and the blast of the atomic bomb. It was in this atmosphere of profound disillusionment and metaphysical nausea that a short, wall-eyed man with a pipe became the most famous intellectual in the world. His name was Jean-Paul Sartre. Along with his lifelong partner, Simone de Beauvoir, Sartre sat in the smoke-filled cafes of Paris, like the Café de Flore, and formulated a philosophy that would define the post-war era: existentialism. If Nietzsche had announced the death of God, Sartre was the one who had to figure out how to live in the silence that followed. The central pillar of this philosophy is encapsulated in the three-word phrase that serves as the title of this chapter: existence precedes essence. To understand the radical weight of these words, we must look at how philosophy had functioned for 2,000 years prior. From Plato to the Enlightenment, it was assumed that essence came first. Think of a paper cutter or a letter opener. When a craftsman sets out to make a paper cutter, he has a concept of it in his mind, an essence. He knows what it is for, how it should look, and what its purpose is before it ever physically exists. In this traditional view, humans were thought to be the same. Whether designed by God or by nature, it was believed that there was a human nature, a blueprint that defined what we are and what we are meant to be. We were born with a purpose already written into our souls. Sartre flipped this entirely. He argued that for human beings, there is no pre-existing blueprint. We are the only beings in the known universe who first exist, who appear on the scene, who surge up in the world, and only afterward define ourselves. There is no God to conceive of us, and therefore no human nature to restrict us. We start as a nothingness, a blank slate of pure potentiality. As Sartre famously put it, man is nothing else but that which he makes of himself. This is the first principle of existentialism. It is a philosophy of terrifying optimism. It tells us that we are not defined by our past, our biology, our upbringing, or our social class. We are the sum of our actions, and since we are always acting, we are always in the process of creating who we are. We are not a thing with a fixed identity. We are a project that is never finished until the moment of death. To explain the mechanics of this existence, Sartre developed a distinction between two types of being in itself, el soi, and being for itself, le pour soi. An object like a rock or a table is being in itself. It is solid, it is what it is, and it cannot be anything else. A rock cannot decide to stop being a rock, but a human being is being for itself. Our consciousness is characterized by a lack or a nothingness at its center. Because we are conscious, we can look at ourselves, we can imagine things that don't exist, and we can say no to our current situation. This nothingness is the very space in which our freedom lives. We are not a solid block of identity. We are the empty space that has the power to choose its next shape. However, this total freedom comes with a crushing weight. Man is condemned to be free. We are condemned because we did not create ourselves, yet we are free because, once thrown into the world, we are responsible for everything we do. There are no excuses. We cannot say, "I was born this way," or "I was just following orders," or "my passions overcame me." For Sartre, to make such excuses is to fall into bad faith, mauvaise foi. Bad faith is the act of lying to ourselves, of pretending that we are an object with no choice. Sartre provides a famous example of the waiter in the cafe. He describes a waiter whose movements are a little too precise, a little too eager, a little too waiter-like. The man is performing the essence of a waiter. He is trying to convince himself and others that being a waiter is his inevitable nature, just as being a stone is the nature of a rock. But he is play-acting. He knows that at any moment he could walk out, change his name, or stop serving coffee. By pretending he has no choice but to be a waiter, he is fleeing from the anguish of his own freedom. We all do this. We pretend we have to go to work, or we have to be loyal to a certain person, because facing the fact that we could choose otherwise is too terrifying. This terror is what Sartre calls anguish. It is the realization that nothing, not even our own past, prevents us from making a different choice in the next second. It is like the vertigo one feels when standing on the edge of a cliff. The fear is not that you will fall. The fear is that you might suddenly decide to throw yourself off. You realize that you are the only thing holding yourself back, and that realization of total power is dizzying. While Sartre focused on the individual's internal void, his partner Simone de Beauvoir expanded these concepts to the social and political realm, specifically in her foundational work, The Second Sex. She applied the principle of existence precedes essence to gender. She famously wrote, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." Just as there is no fixed human nature, Beauvoir argued there is no eternal feminine or biological destiny that defines what it means to be a woman. Historically, men had defined themselves as the subject, the one who acts and chooses, and women as the other, the object, the one who is acted upon. Beauvoir argued that society imposes an essence onto women, labels of being passive, emotional, or nurturing, to limit their freedom. By recognizing that gender roles are constructed rather than natural, she opened the door for a radical reclamation of freedom. If woman is something one becomes through social performance and choice, then one can choose to become something else entirely. Her work remains a bridge between the internal struggle for authenticity and the external struggle for political liberation. This brings us to the social dimension of Sartre's thought, the look, le regard. Sartre realized that we do not live in a vacuum. We are constantly being observed by others. When someone looks at me, they objectify me. They turn me into a thing in their world. If I am sitting in a park and someone walks by, I am no longer just a free consciousness to myself. I am a man sitting on a bench to them. This creates a conflict. I want to be the center of my universe, but the look of the other makes me a mere object in their universe. This is the origin of Sartre's famous line in the play No Exit: "Hell is other people." It is not that other people are necessarily mean. It is that their very existence limits my freedom by fixing me into an identity I didn't choose. But Sartre's philosophy is not one of isolation. Later in his life, he moved toward a more engaged existentialism. He argued that because there is no God and no objective morality, we are responsible for the image of humanity we project. When I choose for myself, I am choosing for all of mankind. If I choose to be a thief, I am effectively saying that theft is an acceptable way for a human to live. Therefore, the weight of the world rests on every individual decision. We must act with commitment, engagement, taking a stand against injustice and oppression, not because a law tells us to, but because we choose to create a world where such things are not allowed. The legacy of existentialism is the demand for authenticity. To live authentically is to acknowledge your facticity, the things you cannot change, like your birthplace or your height, but to never let it crush your transcendence, your ability to project yourself into the future and choose. It is the refusal to be a thing and the courage to be a nothingness that creates its own light. As we move forward into the later chapters of this book, we will see how these ideas evolved into the absurdism of Albert Camus and the deconstruction of the postmodernists. But the core of the existentialist cry remains the most powerful tool for the modern individual. You are the author of your own story. There is no script, there is no director, and the stage is empty. The silence of the universe is not a sign of neglect, it is an invitation. It is your cue to speak, to act, and to define, once and for all, what it means to be human in a world that gives you no answers. Chapter 8: The Myth of Sisyphus. While the existentialism of Jean-Paul Sartre was a philosophy forged in the dimly lit, smoke-heavy atmosphere of Parisian cafes, the absurdism of Albert Camus was a philosophy born of the sun, the sea, and the harsh, unforgiving clarity of the Mediterranean. Camus, an Algerian-born writer whose soul was as much tied to the crashing waves of the North African coast as it was to the intellectual salons of France, stood as a contemporary and eventual rival to Sartre. Yet his conclusions about the human condition were subtly but profoundly different. Where Sartre looked into the void and saw a space where we must build our own meaning through radical choice, Camus looked into that same void and saw something inherently comical, tragic, and beautiful. He called it the absurd. To understand Camus is to understand the art of living in a world that refuses to give us the answers we crave, and to find a way to thrive within that very refusal. The journey into absurdism begins with a fundamental, irreconcilable conflict. Human beings are, by their very nature, creatures of meaning. We have an innate, inextinguishable longing for order, for a sense of purpose, and for a justification for our existence. We want the universe to make sense. We want our suffering to have a divine or cosmic reason, and we want our lives to lead toward a final destination. However, the universe we inhabit, a vast, mechanical, and ancient expanse, is fundamentally indifferent to these desires. It is silent. It offers no explanations for the death of a child, the collapse of an empire, or the beauty of a sunset. The absurd is not found in the human mind alone, nor is it found in the silent universe alone. Rather, the absurd is the divorce between the two. It is the friction created when the human heart's cry for meaning meets what Camus called the unreasonable silence of the world. Camus opens his seminal essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, with perhaps the most famous and jarring sentence in modern philosophy: "There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide." He argues that before we can discuss politics, ethics, or metaphysics, we must first decide if life is worth living at all. If the world is truly meaningless, if we are merely biological accidents on a lonely rock drifting through an infinite nothingness, why should we continue to wake up, go to work, and endure the hardships of existence? This is the ultimate challenge of the absurd. Camus suggests that the moment we realize the world is absurd, we are faced with a choice. Most people spend their lives avoiding this realization through what he calls mechanical existence. The routine of the rising, tram, 4 hours in the office or the factory, meal, sleep, and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday according to the same rhythm. But one day the why arises, the routine collapses, the stage sets fall away, and we are left staring at the raw, meaningless reality of our lives. According to Camus, there are 3 main ways to respond to this realization. The first is physical suicide, which he rejects as a confession that life is too much for us or that we do not understand it. For Camus, suicide is not a solution. It is an escape that ultimately fails to address the problem of the absurd. The second response is what he calls philosophical suicide, or the leap. This is the path taken by those who, unable to bear the tension of the absurd, choose to believe in a transcendent meaning, a god, or a cosmic order that they cannot prove. Camus identifies this in the works of thinkers like Kierkegaard or Husserl. He argues that by making this leap of faith, the individual destroys their own reason and shuts their eyes to the truth of the human condition. They trade the clarity of the absurd for the comfort of a lie. The third response, the one Camus advocates, is rebellion. This is the decision to live without appeal, to maintain the tension of the absurd without trying to resolve it. To rebel is to look the silent universe in the eye and say, I know you have no meaning, but I will live anyway. This is a state of constant defiance. By refusing to commit suicide and refusing to take the leap of faith, the absurd hero becomes the master of their own existence. They find freedom not from the absurd, but within it. If nothing has inherent meaning, then everything is permitted in terms of experiences. The value of life is no longer found in its quality or its purpose, but in its quantity, in the richness and intensity of the moments lived with full awareness of their ultimate futility. To illustrate this, Camus turns to the ancient Greek myth of Sisyphus. Sisyphus was a king who, through his cunning and his hatred of death, managed to outwit the gods and chain up Thanatos, the personification of death itself. For this crime against the natural order, the gods condemned him to a punishment that was as horrific as it was pointless. He was tasked with rolling a massive stone up a steep hill. Every time he neared the summit, the weight of the stone would overcome him, and it would roll all the way back down to the plain. Sisyphus would then have to descend the hill and begin again for all eternity. This is the archetype of futile and hopeless labor. Camus invites us to look closely at Sisyphus during that moment of the descent. As he walks back down toward the plain to retrieve his rock, he is superior to his fate. He is stronger than his rock. Why? Because he is conscious of his condition. His tragedy only exists because he knows the rock will fall again, but in that same knowledge lies his victory. Sisyphus knows that there is no master, no god, and no meaning waiting for him at the top of the mountain. He knows that the struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart. He realizes that all is well. The rock is his thing, and the mountain is his world. By accepting the futility of his task, he negates the power of the gods to punish him. As Camus famously concludes, the struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. This happiness is not the fleeting joy of a child or the contentment of the ignorant. It is the absurd joy of the rebel. It is the joy of knowing that you are the sole creator of your own values in a world that provides none. Camus identifies this heroic stance in other archetypes as well. The Don Juan, who lives for the quantity of his loves without seeking a true love. The actor, who lives 1,000 lives in a few hours on stage, knowing they are all fleeting. And the conqueror, who battles for empires while knowing that history will eventually erase them all. These figures do not live for the future, they live for the now, because the future is a phantom. This philosophy has profound implications for how we view our daily lives. If the universe is absurd, then the pressure to find your passion or fulfill your destiny vanishes. You are no longer a failure if your life doesn't follow a grand narrative arc. The simple act of breathing, of feeling the sun on your skin, of drinking a glass of water, or of engaging in a conversation becomes an act of defiance against the void. Absurdism strips away the grandiosity of human ego and replaces it with a humble yet fierce appreciation for the present moment. Camus's work, particularly his novels The Stranger and The Plague, further explores these themes. In The Stranger, the protagonist Merceau is a man who refuses to play the social game of meaning. When his mother dies, he doesn't cry because he doesn't feel the required emotion. When he kills a man on a beach, it is an act prompted more by the heat and the sun than by malice. It is only when he is facing execution that he truly opens himself to the benign indifference of the universe and finds a strange peace. In The Plague, Camus moves toward a more collective form of rebellion. The characters in the quarantine city of Oran fight against the pestilence, not because they think they will win or because God told them to, but simply because it is the decent thing to do. Their rebellion is a form of solidarity in the face of a shared, absurd suffering. In our modern world, the absurd is more visible than ever. We live in an age of infinite information and rapid technological change, yet we often feel a profound sense of homelessness. We build digital empires and chase social media likes while knowing deep down that these things are as fleeting as Sisyphus's rock. Camus offers us a way through this malaise. He doesn't promise us a cure for the absurd, he promises us a way to live with it. He teaches us that the lack of a higher meaning does not make life worthless, it makes life ours. As we close the chapter on Camus, we see the infinite mirror reflecting a human figure who is no longer searching for a reflection of God or a blueprint of nature. Instead, the figure is simply looking at itself, smiling at the absurdity of the mirror, and turning back to the work of the day. The task ahead of us is to take this absurd freedom and apply it to the structures of our society. How do we organize a world where no one has the ultimate truth? This leads us into the murky waters of political philosophy and the social contract. Chapter 9: The Social Contract. In the previous chapters, our journey through the infinite mirror has focused largely on the solitary theater of the mind. We have explored how the individual perceives reality, how the I finds certainty in doubt, and how the lonely rebel faces an absurd universe. But human beings are not merely islands of consciousness. We are social animals, entangled in a web of relationships, hierarchies, and laws. This brings us to one of the most vital and contentious questions in the history of thought. Why do we live together in organized societies? Why do we agree to obey laws, pay taxes, and grant certain individuals the power of life and death over us? This is the domain of the social contract, a theoretical framework that seeks to justify the existence of the state and the boundaries of political authority. To understand the social contract, we must travel back to a hypothetical time before time, a conceptual landscape known as the state of nature. This is the condition of humanity before the invention of government, police, courts, or written laws. By imagining what life would be like in this raw, uncurbed state, three great philosophers, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, built three radically different visions of what society should be. The first and most somber of these visions belongs to Thomas Hobbes. Writing in the mid-17th century against the bloody backdrop of the English Civil War, Hobbes was a man haunted by the spectre of chaos. In his masterpiece, Leviathan, he argued that the state of nature is not a peaceful garden, but a war of all against all. In this state, there is no industry, no culture, no society, and worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death. Hobbes famously concluded that without a central power to keep us all in awe, the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. For Hobbes, the primary human drive is not reason or love, but the fear of death and the desire for power. In the state of nature, everyone has a right to everything, which means no one has a right to anything. If you grow a crop, someone stronger can kill you and take it. To escape this hellscape, rational individuals agree to a social contract. They make a collective bargain. I will give up my right to govern myself and my right to use violence, provided that you do the same. They hand over all their power to a single, absolute authority, the Leviathan. This sovereign can be a king or an assembly, but their power must be total. For Hobbes, the only alternative to absolute rule is absolute chaos. We trade our freedom for the one thing that matters most: security. But as the Enlightenment dawned, a different perspective emerged from the mind of John Locke. Writing 40 years after Hobbes, Locke had a much more optimistic view of human potential. In his two treatises of government, he argued that the state of nature is not a war zone, but a state of perfect freedom, governed by natural law. For Locke, even before there are governments, humans possess natural rights that are granted by God or reason, the rights to life, liberty, and property. Locke's state of nature is inconvenient, but not necessarily brutish. The problem arises when disputes occur over property. Without a neutral judge, every man is the judge in his own case, leading to endless cycles of revenge. Thus, we enter the social contract not to save ourselves from slaughter, but to protect our pre-existing rights. For Locke, the government is not an absolute master, but a trustee. We give the state the power to enforce the law, but only on the condition that it protects our life, liberty, and property. If the government fails to do this, or worse, if it becomes the very entity that violates those rights, then the contract is broken. In a radical departure from Hobbes, Locke argued that the people have a right to revolution. This idea became the philosophical heartbeat of the American and French revolutions, turning the individual from a subject into a citizen. However, the most complex and poetic vision of the social contract came from Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Writing in the 18th century, Rousseau looked at the civilized world of his time, with its massive inequality, its vanity, and its corruption, and felt a profound sense of loss. He opened his work The Social Contract with a cry that still echoes today: man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. Rousseau believed that the state of nature was actually a period of innocence. He imagined the noble savage living in harmony with nature, guided by simple needs and a natural pity for others. It was the invention of private property that ruined everything. The first man who, having enclosed a piece of ground, bethought himself of saying, "This is mine," and found people simple enough to believe him, was the real founder of civil society, Rousseau wrote. From that moment, inequality, greed, and war were born. Rousseau's social contract was an attempt to find a way for us to live together while remaining as free as we were in the forest. His solution was the general will. He argued that a legitimate society is one where the people do not submit to a king or a parliament, but to the collective will of the entire community. In this system, we don't just obey laws, we are the authors of the laws. When I obey a law that I helped create for the common good, I am only obeying myself. This is the definition of true freedom. However, Rousseau's theory has a famous and dangerous edge. He argued that if an individual refuses to follow the general will, the community has the right to force him to be free. This paradox, the idea that the collective can force an individual to be truly free by making them obey the common good, has been used to justify both the most radical democracies and the most terrifying totalitarian regimes in history. The infinite mirror of political philosophy reflects these three faces of power. When we look at our modern world, we see Hobbes in our massive military budgets and our surveillance states, the price we pay for security. We see Locke in our constitutions, our courts, and our belief that every human being has unalienable rights that no government can touch. And we see Rousseau in our democratic rallies, our collective social movements, and our ongoing struggle to define what the common good actually looks like in a diverse world. The social contract is not a document signed in a hall, it is an ongoing, daily negotiation. It is the silent agreement we make every time we stop at a red light, pay our taxes, or respect our neighbor's fence. It asks us to balance three competing needs: the need for order, Hobbes; the need for liberty, Locke; and the need for community, Rousseau. As we move forward, we must ask, in an age of global crises and digital frontiers, is the old contract still valid? How do we expand the general will to include those who have been historically excluded from the contract, the poor, the marginalized, and the environment itself? The mirror now shows us not just ourselves, but the entire body politic, and the reflection warns us that a contract built on fear alone will eventually break, while a contract built on justice requires constant, vigilant maintenance. Chapter 10: The Veil of Ignorance. As we move into the 20th century, the infinite mirror of philosophy begins to reflect a world of unprecedented complexity. The simple social contracts of the Enlightenment, designed for relatively homogeneous nations or small city-states, found themselves strained by the realities of global capitalism, systemic inequality, and the diverse, pluralistic societies of the modern age. If the previous century was defined by the struggle between the individual's freedom and the state's order, the mid-20th century was defined by a search for fairness. In 1971, a quiet, stuttering Harvard professor named John Rawls published a book that would become the most important work of political philosophy since the 19th century, A Theory of Justice. Rawls realized that before we can build a just society, we must solve a psychological problem that has plagued humanity since its inception: our own inherent bias. Every one of us is born into a situated reality. We are born with a certain skin color, a certain gender, a specific level of intelligence, and into a specific economic class. Whether we like it or not, these accidents of birth, what Rawls called the natural lottery, deeply influence our view of what is fair. A wealthy person might view low taxes as the pinnacle of justice, while a person born into poverty might see a robust social safety net as the only moral path. We are all, in a sense, prisoners of our own vantage point. To break free from this, Rawls proposed one of the most brilliant and enduring thought experiments in history, the original position and the veil of ignorance. Imagine that you and a group of others are gathered to decide the fundamental rules of a brand new society. You are the architects of the laws, the tax codes, and the judicial system. However, there is a catch. You must make these decisions from behind a veil of ignorance. While behind this veil, you have no idea who you will be once you step into the world you are creating. You do not know your race, your gender, your religion, or your sexual orientation. You do not know if you will be a brilliant athlete or someone with a chronic disability. You do not know if you will be born into a billionaire's mansion or a crowded slum. You are stripped of your identity, leaving only your capacity for rational thought. Rawls argues that from this original position, human beings would not choose a system based on utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number we explored in Chapter 5. Why? Because from behind the veil, you realize that you might belong to the minority that is being sacrificed for the majority's happiness. You wouldn't risk being a slave in a society that is 90% happy masters. Nor would you choose a purely libertarian system where the winners take everything and the losers starve, because you might be one of the losers. Instead, Rawls suggests that rational people would adopt a maximin strategy. They would seek to maximize the minimum. They would design a society that ensures even the person at the very bottom has a life of dignity and opportunity. From this thought experiment, Rawls derived two fundamental principles of justice. The first is the liberty principle. It states that every person is to have an equal right to the most extensive basic liberty compatible with a similar liberty for others. This includes freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, and the right to vote. These are non-negotiable. You wouldn't trade your right to speak for a higher salary, because from behind the veil, you know that without liberty, you have no way to protect yourself if the government turns against your specific, but currently unknown, identity. The second principle is more complex and controversial, the difference principle. Rawls acknowledged that total, forced equality of outcome is often counterproductive. If a surgeon makes the same salary as someone who puts in no effort at all, no one will undergo the years of grueling training required to save lives. Therefore, some inequality is acceptable, but only under one condition. Social and economic inequalities are to be arranged so that they are to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged members of society. This is a revolutionary way of thinking about wealth and talent. Rawls argued that your intelligence, your beauty, or your drive are not things you earned in a vacuum. They are products of the natural lottery. You didn't choose your DNA. Therefore, you don't have a moral claim to the absolute entirety of the wealth those talents produce. Instead, your talents should be viewed as a common asset. You are allowed to benefit from them and become wealthy, but only if your success also pulls up those at the bottom. The CEO can have their private jet, but only if the system that allows for private jets also ensures that the poorest child has access to healthcare and education. But Rawls's vision did not go unchallenged. His Harvard colleague, Robert Nozick, fired back with a powerful defense of individual liberty in his book Anarchy, State and Utopia. Nozick proposed the Wilt Chamberlain example. Imagine a society that starts with a perfectly equal distribution of wealth. Now, imagine 1 million people voluntarily choose to pay Wilt Chamberlain 25 cents each to watch him play basketball. At the end of the season, Chamberlain is a millionaire and the wealth distribution is unequal. Nozick argued that because this inequality resulted from free, voluntary exchanges, it is inherently just. To take that money away from Chamberlain and redistribute it is, in Nozick's view, a form of forced labor. He argued that taxation of earnings from labor is on a par with forced labor. This debate between Rawls and Nozick defines the central tension of modern politics. social justice versus individual entitlement. Rawls looks at the infinite mirror and sees a collective responsibility to the vulnerable. He reminds us that, there but for the grace of God go I. He challenges us to build a world that we would be happy to enter, even if we were the least lucky person in it. Nozick, on the other hand, sees a world of sovereign individuals whose primary right is to be left alone and to keep what they have earned. Beyond the halls of academia, the veil of ignorance has become a vital tool for ethical decision-making in the real world. When we design city layouts, do we consider those in wheelchairs? When we write algorithms for AI, do we consider the biases that might hurt marginalized groups? If the designers had to live under their own systems without knowing their status, the world would likely be a much kinder place. Rawls also introduced the concept of reflective equilibrium. He understood that we cannot simply follow a formula to find justice. Instead, we must constantly go back and forth between our theoretical principles and our considered judgments or intuitions. If a theory of justice tells us something that feels deeply immoral, like it's okay to torture an innocent child to save a city, we must revise either our theory or our intuition until they reach a state of balance. Justice is not a static destination. It is a process of constant refinement and self-correction. As we conclude this chapter, the mirror shows us a vision of a fair society. It is not a utopia where everyone is the same, but a society where the natural lottery no longer determines a person's worth or their destiny. It is a society built on the recognition that we are all in this together, and that the true measure of our civilization is how we treat those who have the least. The question Rawls leaves us with is a haunting one. If you were to be born again tomorrow, and you could not choose your family, your body, or your mind, what kind of world would you want to wake up in? The answer to that question is the blueprint for a just society. Chapter 11: The Ghost in the Machine. For centuries, the infinite mirror of philosophy has reflected a dual image of the human being. On one side there is the body, a physical biological machine made of bone, blood, and neurons, subject to the laws of gravity, decay, and physics. On the other side there is the mind, an invisible, weightless realm of thoughts, memories, and the self that feels as though it resides somewhere behind the eyes, peering out at the world. This division, famously codified by René Descartes in the 17th century, created a fracture in our understanding of existence that we have yet to fully heal. It is the mind-body problem, and in the 20th century, it was famously challenged by the British philosopher Gilbert Ryle, who dismissed the traditional view as a category mistake and labeled it with a term that has haunted cognitive science ever since: the ghost in the machine. To understand the ghost, we must first understand why we invited it into the machine in the first place. Our internal experience is profoundly subjective. When you bite into a lemon, you don't just experience a chemical reaction of citric acid on your tongue, you experience the sourness, a vivid private sensation that belongs only to you. When you feel the sting of a heartbreak or the swell of a beautiful melody, these experiences don't feel like matter in motion. They feel like something else entirely. Because of this, Descartes argued that the mind must be a different kind of substance altogether, a res cogitans or thinking thing that is non-spatial and immortal, merely piloting the res extensa, the physical body. However, as science advanced, this dualism became increasingly difficult to defend. If the mind is non-physical and has no weight or location, how does it interact with the physical brain? How does the ghost pull the levers of the machine? This is the interaction problem that Descartes tried to solve with the pineal gland, but his answer was ultimately a failure of logic. In 1949, Gilbert Ryle published The Concept of Mind, aiming to blow the ghost out of the machine once and for all. He argued that the very idea of the mind, as a separate place or entity, was a logical error, a category mistake. Ryle illustrated this with his famous university analogy. Imagine a visitor comes to Oxford or Cambridge. A guide shows them the libraries, the laboratories, the dormitories, and the administrative offices. After the tour, the visitor asks, "I've seen all these buildings and people. but where is the university? The visitor has made a category mistake. They are treating the university as if it were an additional building alongside the others, rather than the collective organization of all the things they have already seen. Ryle argued that the mind is exactly the same. We see people talking, remembering, solving math problems, and feeling angry, and we mistakenly assume there must be a separate thing called the mind behind it all. In reality, the mind is simply the way the body behaves and the functions it performs. This led to the rise of physicalism, or materialism, the belief that nothing exists except matter and its movements. In this view, thoughts are nothing more than electrochemical signals firing across synapses. If you change the brain through injury, drugs, or surgery, you change the person. There is no hidden pilot, the ship is its own captain. But as the ghost was being evicted, a new problem arose, one that continues to baffle the greatest minds in contemporary philosophy and neuroscience. It is what David Chalmers calls the hard problem of consciousness. We can explain the easy problems, how the brain processes visual data, how it stores memories, or how it triggers a flight or response. These are mechanical questions about how the computer of the brain works. But the hard problem is the question of why. Why does all that physical processing feel like something from the inside? Why aren't we just philosophical zombies, biological machines that act, talk, and move exactly like humans, but have no internal light of awareness? To highlight this mystery, Frank Jackson proposed the Mary's Room thought experiment. Imagine Mary, a brilliant scientist who lives her entire life in a black and white room. She learns everything there is to know about the science of color. She understands the physics of light, the biology of the retina, and the specific neural pathways that trigger when someone sees the color red. She is the world's leading expert on redness. One day, Mary is released from her room and sees a red rose for the first time. Does she learn anything new? Most philosophers argue that she does learn something new. She learns what red looks like. This suggests that physicalism is incomplete. Even if you have all the physical facts about the world, you might still be missing the qualia, the raw, subjective feel of experience. This led Thomas Nagel to write his famous essay, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? Nagel argued that even if we mapped every neuron in a bat's brain, we would never know what it feels like to perceive the world through echolocation. Subjectivity is an irreducible feature of reality that science, by its very nature as an objective pursuit, cannot fully capture. As the infinite mirror reflects these debates, we find ourselves at a crossroads. Some philosophers, like Daniel Dennett, argue that consciousness is a user illusion, a clever trick played by the brain to help us navigate the world. Others are turning back to ancient ideas like panpsychism, the belief that consciousness is not something that emerges from complex brains, but is a fundamental property of the universe itself, like mass or charge. In this view, even atoms might have a tiny, infinitesimal spark of feeling. The stakes of the ghost in the machine debate have never been higher. We are moving toward a world of artificial intelligence that can write poetry, diagnose diseases, and hold conversations. We are exploring Neuralink technologies that aim to bridge the gap between silicon and grey matter. If we cannot define what a mind is, how will we know if a machine has one? If we upload our memories to a digital cloud, are we surviving, or are we just building a better ghost for a different kind of machine? The mirror now reveals an unsettling truth. We are the only mystery we cannot solve. We are the observers who cannot observe the observer. As we move from the nature of the mind to the nature of reality itself, we must reckon with the possibility that our ghost is both more fragile and more profound than Descartes ever imagined. We are not pilots in a ship, we are the music played by the instrument of the brain. The music cannot exist without the instrument, but the music is not the wood or the strings. It is something emergent, fleeting, and infinitely precious. As we conclude this chapter, we prepare to step into the ancient and vibrant world of Eastern metaphysics, where the self we have been trying to define for 11 chapters is often viewed not as a ghost to be found, but as an illusion to be transcended. Chapter 12, The Tao and the Void. For 11 chapters, our journey through the infinite mirror has been predominantly a Western one. We have traced a line from the stone walls of Plato's cave to the digital ghost in the machine of modern cognitive science. Throughout this odyssey, there has been a persistent, underlying assumption that there is a self, a central, stable observer who experiences the world, makes choices, and possesses a soul or a mind that is distinct from the objects it perceives. Even when we doubted the world, we clung to the I, but as we turn the mirror toward the East, to the ancient traditions of India and China, the reflection begins to dissolve. We move from a philosophy of substance to a philosophy of flow. In this chapter, we explore the radical proposition that the self we have been trying to protect is, in fact, the very veil that prevents us from seeing reality as it truly is. The Great Awakening, from Atman to Brahman. The story begins in the Indus Valley thousands of years ago, with the formulation of the Upanishads. These sacred texts represent the first great turning inward of the human spirit. While Western philosophy often sought to categorize the world into different types of matter or logic, the ancient Indian rishis, seers, sought the underlying unity of all things. They introduced a concept that would challenge every Western notion of identity, tat tivam asi, or thou art that. In the Vedic tradition, the individual soul is called the Atman. For centuries, we have thought of the Atman as a tiny spark of divinity inside us, a true self that remains constant while our bodies age and our thoughts flicker. However, the Upanishads argue that this Atman is not a separate entity trapped in a body. Instead, it is identical to Brahman, the ultimate, impersonal, and infinite reality of the universe. Imagine a wave in the ocean. The wave has a shape, a height, and a direction. It might think of itself as a wave, distinct from the other waves around it, but the wave is just a temporary configuration of the ocean. When the wave crashes, nothing is lost, it simply returns to the water. In Eastern metaphysics, we are the waves, and Brahman is the ocean. Our suffering arises because we identify with the wave form rather than the water substance. To realize thou art that is to realize that your deepest I is the same I that moves the stars and grows the grass. The anatomy of no self, Buddhism's radical deconstruction. If the Hindu tradition suggests that the self is everything, the Buddhist revolution, led by Siddhartha Gautama, suggested that the self is nothing. This is the doctrine of anatta, no self. While we have spent chapters discussing the ghost in the machine, the Buddha performed a surgical deconstruction of that ghost. He asked, if you look closely at what you call yourself, what do you actually find? He identified 5 heaps or skandhas that make up a human being. Form, the physical body and senses. Sensation, the raw feelings of pleasure, pain, or indifference. Perception, the labels and categories we put on things. Mental formations, our habits, prejudices, and willpower. Consciousness, the basic awareness of all the above. The Buddha argued that if you look through these 5 heaps, you will find no soul hiding behind them. You are like a chariot. If you take away the wheels, the axle, the seat, and the horse, where is the chariot? It is merely a name we give to a collection of parts working together. In the same way, the self is a linguistic shorthand, a useful fiction that we mistake for a solid reality. This leads to the concept of shunyata, or emptiness. To say that a thing is empty does not mean it doesn't exist. It means it is empty of a separate, independent identity. Everything exists only in relation to everything else. This is dependent origination. A flower exists because of the sun, the rain, the soil, and the gardener. Without them, there is no flower. The flow of the Tao, Lao Tzu and the uncarved block. As we move further east into China, the focus shifts from the void of the mind to the flow of nature. Taoism, founded by the legendary Lao Tzu, suggests that the universe is governed by a fundamental nameless principle called the Tao, the Way. The Tao is not a god but a rhythm, a natural balance that permeates all existence. The central practice of Taoism is Wu Wei, which is often translated as non-action, but more accurately means effortless action. It is the art of swimming with the current rather than against it. If Western philosophy is about carving the world into categories and empires, Taoism is about the uncarved block, Pu. It suggests that our greatest strength lies in our softness and our ability to return to our natural, unconditioned state. Water is the primary metaphor for the Tao. Water is the softest thing in the world, yet it can wear away the hardest stone. It doesn't try to be powerful, it simply follows its nature. In Taoism, the self is not a fortress to be defended, but a channel through which the Tao flows. When we stop trying to be someone, we become capable of being anything. The synthesis, the infinite mirror dissolves. What happens when we bring these Eastern insights back to our Western problems? If the ghost in the machine is an illusion, Buddhism, and if our internal consciousness is actually the fabric of the universe, Vedanta, and if the best way to live is to surrender to the natural flow, Taoism, then the mind-body problem changes its shape. Perhaps the hard problem of consciousness is only hard because we have separated the observer from the observed. If there is no I in the head, then there is no gap to bridge. There is only the process of experiencing. The sourness of the lemon is not in the lemon, nor is it in your brain. It is an event that occurs in the interaction of the two. We are not things having experiences. We are the experiences themselves. Living with this realization requires a profound shift in ethics. If I realize that you and I are both waves of the same ocean, Brahman, or that we are both empty of a separate self, Shunyata, then compassion is no longer a moral duty, it is a logical necessity. To hurt you is to hurt myself, just as the left hand would not strike the right hand. As we reach the conclusion of this chapter, the infinite mirror has performed its final trick. We started by looking for our reflection, trying to see who we are. But after moving through the Tao and the void, we realize that the mirror is not reflecting a person. It is reflecting the light itself. The person looking into the mirror has vanished, and only the looking remains. Chapter 13: The Language Game. We have spent the vast majority of our journey through the infinite mirror, assuming that our thoughts and our words are transparent windows into the soul and the world. We assumed that when we spoke of justice, the self, the good, or existence, we were referring to solid, objective things that existed out there in the ether, waiting to be discovered by a sharp enough mind. But in the early to mid-20th century, a brilliant, tortured, and intensely charismatic Austrian named Ludwig Wittgenstein arrived on the scene to shatter this transparency. He proposed a radical and unsettling idea, that philosophy is not a search for truth, but a battle against the bewitchment of our intelligence by means of language. Wittgenstein's career is unique in the history of thought because he effectively solved philosophy twice, in two completely different and contradictory ways. In his first phase, he believed language was a perfect logical map of the world. In his second phase, the one that would change the world, he realized that language is not a map at all, but a game played with ever-shifting rules. The picture theory, language as a map. The young Wittgenstein, a protege of Bertrand Russell, began with the belief that the world is a collection of facts, and language is a tool for picturing those facts. In his first great work, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, he argued that every meaningful sentence is a logical picture of a possible state of affairs in the world. If I say, the cat is on the mat, the word cat stands for the object, the word mat stands for another object, and the structure of the sentence mirrors the physical relationship between them. This led to a brutal conclusion. If a sentence cannot be traced back to a physical state of affairs that can be seen or measured, it is senseless. He argued that most of the big questions of philosophy, questions about the meaning of life, the nature of God, or the essence of beauty, cannot be answered because they cannot be pictured. They are literally nonsensical. He ended the book with one of the most famous lines in philosophy: "Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent." For a decade, he believed he had ended philosophy. He quit the field, became a school teacher, and later a gardener, convinced there was nothing left to say. The turning point, the beetle in the box. However, Wittgenstein returned to Cambridge years later with a profound realization. His first book was wrong. Language doesn't just picture things. Language is used to do things. It is a tool for living. He moved from the idea of language as a map to language as a language game. To explain why our traditional philosophical debates are often dead ends, he proposed a thought experiment known as the beetle in the box. Imagine everyone has a small box. Inside the box is something we all call a beetle. No one can ever look into anyone else's box. You can only look at your own. Everyone claims they know what a beetle is by looking at theirs. Now imagine the word beetle is used in our language. In this scenario, the actual thing inside the box is irrelevant. It could be a bug, a stone, or nothing at all. The word beetle still functions in our conversation because we have a shared rule for how to use it. Wittgenstein used this to attack the idea of a private language. We often think that our internal feelings, like pain, are private things that only we can truly know. But Wittgenstein argued that the word pain only has meaning because it is part of a public game with rules. If I am in pain, I cry out, I go to a doctor, I seek sympathy. The meaning of pain is found in the use of the word in a social context, not in some mysterious internal sensation. Language games and forms of life. Wittgenstein argued that there is no such thing as language with a capital L instead. There are countless language games. The way a physicist uses the word force is a different game than the way a priest uses the word force, which is different again from how a police officer uses it. Each game has its own rules, and confusion arises when we try to take a word from one game and force it into another. Most philosophical problems, he argued, are like cramps in our language. We get tangled up because we treat words like time or mind as if they were physical objects we could put under a microscope. We ask, what is time? As if it were a thing, when really, time is just a way we coordinate our schedules and talk about the sequence of events. The job of the philosopher is not to discover new truths, but to show the fly the way out of the fly bottle, to untie the knots we've made in our own thinking. This leads to the concept of forms of life. We don't just speak, we live. Language is woven into our activities, walking, building, praying, mourning. We can only understand a word if we understand the form of life that it belongs to. This is why he famously said, if a lion could speak, we could not understand him. Even if the lion spoke perfect English, his form of life, his desires, his sensory world, his social structure, would be so alien to us that his words would have no meaning in our game. Family resemblances. The infinite mirror of the past tried to find essential definitions. We tried to find the one thing that all just acts have in common. Wittgenstein argued that this is a wild goose chase. He pointed to the example of games. Think of board games, card games, Olympic games, and ball games. What is the one thing they all have in common? Some involve luck, some skill, some are competitive, some are cooperative. There is no essence of a game. Instead, there is a complicated network of overlapping similarities, family resemblances. Just as members of a family might share the same nose, others the same eyes, and others the same temperament, without any one feature being shared by everyone, our concepts are held together by these resemblances. We don't need a perfect definition to use a word correctly. We just need to know how to play the game. The silence and the therapeutic turn. The legacy of the language game is a profound shift in what it means to be a thinker. Philosophy becomes therapeutic. Instead of building grand systems like Hegel or Kant, we use philosophy to clear away the linguistic debris that prevents us from seeing the world clearly. We realize that many of our deepest anxieties and debates are actually language on holiday, moments where words have been pulled out of their useful context and are spinning in a void. In the digital age, this is more relevant than ever. When we debate artificial intelligence, are we playing a game of computer science or a game of science fiction? When we talk about social media likes, are we using the language of friendship or the language of statistics? The mirror no longer shows us a reflection of truth. It shows us a reflection of our own grammar. It shows us the rules we have made for ourselves. To understand ourselves is not to look deeper into the soul, but to look more closely at the way we speak to one another in the rough ground of everyday life. Chapter 14, The Deconstructed Mirror. For 13 chapters we have been building. We have laid the bricks of reason, the mortar of the social contract, the scaffolding of logic, and the glass of the mind. We have treated the history of philosophy as a grand architectural project, a meta-narrative of human progress where each thinker stands on the shoulders of the last to get a clearer view of the truth. But as we enter the mid to late 20th century, we encounter a group of thinkers who didn't want to build the house further. They wanted to take it apart. They wanted to see what was hidden beneath the floorboards and behind the wallpaper. This is the era of postmodernism and post-structuralism, and its most formidable figure was a man who taught us to read between the lines until the lines themselves began to dissolve. Jacques Derrida. If Wittgenstein showed us that language is a game, Derrida showed us that the game has no bottom. He introduced a method of analysis called deconstruction. To the casual observer, deconstruction sounds like destruction, but it is something far more subtle and surgically precise. It is the act of showing that any text, any idea, and any system of thought contains the seeds of its own contradiction. If the infinite mirror was meant to give us a stable reflection of reality, Derrida took a hammer to it, not to destroy the glass, but to show us that the reflection was always an illusion created by the way the glass was cut. The critique of logocentrism. To understand Derrida, we must understand what he called logocentrism. This is the ancient Western belief that there is a central, logos, a ground of truth, a divine word, or a transcendental signified, that exists outside of language and gives meaning to everything else. We have always believed that our words refer to something real and fixed. When I say justice, I assume there is a pure concept of justice out there that my word is trying to capture. Derrida argued that this is a metaphysics of presence. We crave the presence of truth. We want to believe that there is a final answer. But Derrida pointed out that words never actually touch the things they describe. Instead, words only refer to other words. If you look up the definition of justice in a dictionary, you find a string of other words like fairness, equity, or law. If you look those up, you find even more words. You are trapped in a circular web of signs. There is no center to the web, there is only the web itself. As he famously and controversially wrote, Il n'y a pas de hors texte, often translated as there is nothing outside the text. Difference, the endless delay. Derrida coined a new word to describe how language works: difference. This is a pun in French that combines two meanings, to differ and to defer. To differ, a word only has meaning because it is different from other words. Hot only means hot because it is not cold. Man only means man because it is not woman. Meaning is defined by what a thing is not. To defer, because a word's meaning depends on its relationship to other words, meaning is never fully present in the moment. It is always pushed back, always deferred down the chain of language. Think of it like a chase. You are chasing the true meaning of a sentence, but every word you reach points you to the next one. You never arrive at the truth itself. The mirror isn't reflecting reality, it's reflecting another mirror which reflects another, in an infinite hallway of echoes. Dismantling binary oppositions. One of the most powerful tools of deconstruction is the dismantling of binary oppositions. Western thought is built on pairs. Presence/absence. Speech/writing. Male/female. Reason/emotion. Nature/culture. In every pair, we traditionally privilege the first term over the second. We think presence is better than absence, or reason is superior to emotion. Derrida argued that these hierarchies are not natural, they are constructed to maintain power. By deconstructing a binary, you don't just flip it, you show that the two terms are actually dependent on each other. You cannot have the concept of reason without the irrational to define it against. The superior term is secretly haunted by the inferior one. By breaking these binaries, Derrida opened the door for a radical new way of thinking about identity, politics, and art. If the boundary between nature and culture is a blur, then many of our laws and social norms, which we claim are natural, are actually just choices we've made. The death of the author and the power of the reader. This shift in philosophy coincided with the ideas of Roland Barthes, who announced the death of the author. In the old way of thinking, the meaning of a book was what the author intended. If you wanted to understand Hamlet, you studied Shakespeare. But in a deconstructed world, the author's intention doesn't matter. Once the text is written, it belongs to the language and to the reader. The reader creates the meaning every time they engage with the text. This makes the infinite mirror incredibly personal and incredibly fluid. There is no correct reading of history, of a law, or of a holy book. There are only interpretations, and some interpretations are more powerful or useful than others. The ethics of deconstruction, the impossible gift. Many critics accused Derrida of being a nihilist, someone who believes in nothing. But in his later years, Derrida turned toward ethics and politics. He argued that deconstruction is actually a form of justice. He made a distinction between the law and justice. The law is a system of rules that can be deconstructed. It changes over time, it is biased, and it is made of words. But justice is the undeconstructible horizon we are always aiming for. Justice is the infinite call of the other person. He wrote about the impossible gift and infinite hospitality. If you give someone a gift because you expect a thank you or a return gift, it isn't a gift, it's a transaction. A true gift must be given without any hope of return, which is almost impossible for humans to do. Similarly, true hospitality is welcoming the stranger without asking for their ID or their purpose. While we can never achieve these perfect states, the act of trying to reach them is what makes us moral. The postmodern condition, Lyotard and the end of big stories. While Derrida was taking apart the engine of language, Jean-François Lyotard was looking at the bigger picture. He defined the postmodern condition as an incredulity toward metanarratives. A metanarrative is a big story we tell ourselves to explain everything. Science will solve all our problems is a metanarrative. Christianity will save our souls is a metanarrative. Marxism will lead to a classless utopia is a metanarrative. Lyotard argued that in the postmodern age, these big stories have collapsed. We no longer believe in a single, universal truth. Instead, we have millions of small stories, local, personal truths that exist side by side. This leads to a world that feels fragmented and chaotic, but also incredibly free. We are no longer forced to march to the beat of a single drum. The infinite mirror has shattered into billions of tiny shards, and each shard reflects a different, valid perspective on the world. Living in the shards. So how do we live in a deconstructed world? If there is no objective truth, no fixed identity, and no central logos, how do we keep from falling into despair? The postmodern answer is to embrace the play. If life is a game of language and signs, then we should play it with irony, creativity, and a deep respect for the other. We should be suspicious of anyone who claims to have the final answer, because that person is usually trying to exercise power over us. Deconstruction teaches us to be critical. It teaches us to ask, who does this definition serve? What is being left out of this story? What are the hidden assumptions behind this law? It is a philosophy of perpetual questioning. It keeps the infinite mirror from ever becoming a prison of fixed ideas. As we stand in the wreckage of the grand philosophical systems of the past, we realize that we haven't lost the world. We have gained a more honest relationship with it. We are no longer looking for a ghost, or a god, or an essence. We are looking at the beautiful, messy, contradictory process of being alive. We are the ones who write the story, even as we acknowledge that the ink is never dry. Chapter 15: The Future of Thought. We have traveled from the flickering shadows of Plato's cave to the fractured, shimmering shards of the postmodern mirror. We have seen the self built up as a divine soul, deconstructed into a language game, and finally dispersed into a web of difference. But as we stand in the year 2025, the infinite mirror faces a challenge unlike any other in the history of human consciousness. For the first time, we are not just reflecting on the world, we are building a new kind of mirror, one that can reflect, think, and perhaps even feel back at us. We are entering the era of posthumanism, where the boundaries between biology and technology, and between human intelligence and artificial intelligence, are beginning to dissolve. The final chapter of our journey is not a history, but a horizon. It is an exploration of three existential frontiers: the silicon mind, the ethics of the Anthropocene, and the search for meaning in an age of total information. The silicon mind, can a machine have a soul? In Chapter 11, we discuss the ghost in the machine. Today, the machine has become so sophisticated that the ghost seems to be haunting the circuits in ways we didn't predict. The rise of large language models and generative AI has forced a return to the most fundamental question of philosophy: what is consciousness? If an AI can write a poem that moves you to tears, or argue for justice more persuasively than a human lawyer, does it matter if there is nothing it is like to be that AI? We are faced with the Turing test on a cosmic scale. Alan Turing suggested that if a machine could mimic human conversation so well that we couldn't tell the difference, we should grant it intelligence. But contemporary philosophers like John Searle argue, with his Chinese room thought experiment, that syntax is not semantics. A machine can manipulate symbols perfectly without ever understanding what those symbols mean. However, as we move toward artificial general intelligence, AGI, the debate shifts. If consciousness is emergent, a result of complex information processing, then there is no reason in principle why a silicon-based system couldn't become conscious. This leads to a terrifying ethical crossroads. If a machine becomes conscious, does it have human rights? Is turning off a sentient AI a form of murder? The infinite mirror is now reflecting a non-human intelligence, and in doing so, it forces us to define what is uniquely us. If creativity, logic, and language are no longer exclusive to humans, perhaps our essence lies in our vulnerability, our ability to suffer, to die, and to feel the weight of time. The ethics of the Anthropocene, philosophy for a dying planet. While we look toward the stars and the silicon, the ground beneath our feet is shifting. We live in the Anthropocene, a geological epoch defined by human impact on the Earth's ecosystems. This reality has shattered the old social contract, Chapter 9, which only considered the rights of living, adult humans. Modern philosophy is now grappling with interspecies justice and long-termism. Interspecies justice, building on the utilitarian expanding circle, thinkers like Peter Singer and Martha Nussbaum argue that our moral compass must include all sentient beings. If a creature can feel pain, its interests must be factored into our greatest good, calculus. Long-termism. This is the idea that we have a moral obligation to the billions of humans who haven't been born yet. From the veil of ignorance, Chapter 10, we should design a world that is sustainable for the year 3000, not just the year 2025. The mirror now shows us not just our faces, but the faces of the forests, the oceans, and the future generations. It asks, can we move from egocentrism to ecocentrism? If the self is truly a web of connections, as we saw in Eastern metaphysics, then destroying the environment is quite literally a form of suicide. The crisis of truth, hyperreality, and the algorithmic cave. In the postmodern chapter, we discuss the end of big stories. In the 21st century, this has evolved into what Jean Baudrillard called hyperreality. This is a state where the map has become more real than the territory. We live in a world of simulacra, images and signs that have no original reality. Think of a social media profile. It is a curated, edited version of a life. But as we spend more time interacting with the profile than the person, the profile becomes the reality. Our politics and our social lives are now governed by algorithms, digital language games that don't seek truth, but seek engagement. We have entered a new kind of cave. In Plato's version, we were chained by our senses. In the algorithmic cave, we are chained by our likes. The shadows on the wall are now tailored specifically to our biases, creating echo chambers where the mirror only reflects what we already believe. Philosophy's new task is digital epistemology. How do we find truth in an ocean of deepfakes and post-truth rhetoric? IV. The search for meaning, the neat existentialist turn. In an age where we can change our bodies with biohacking, our moods with pharmaceuticals, and our reality with VR, the question of why becomes louder than ever. We are returning to the existentialism of Sartre and Camus, but with a high-tech twist. If we can live for 150 years, or if we can automate all labor, what will we do with our freedom? Nietzsche's Übermensch is no longer a poetic metaphor. It is a literal possibility through transhumanism. But as we gain the power of gods, we must avoid the despair of the last man. The final lesson of the infinite mirror is that meaning is not something you find, it is something you forge. Whether we are biological or digital, whether we live in a forest or a megacity, the act of rebellion, Camus, remains the same. We must choose to create beauty, to practice kindness, and to seek understanding, not because the universe demands it, but because we do. Conclusion: the mirror is yours. As this book comes to a close, the mirror is passed to you. You are the latest link in a chain of thinkers that stretches back to the first human who looked at the stars and asked, why? The infinite mirror is not a static object, it is a living conversation. Every time you question a certainty, every time you empathize with a stranger, and every time you choose duty over desire, you are contributing to the reflection. The history of philosophy is not a closed book. It is a project that requires your voice. We are a strange species, a handful of stardust that has somehow learned to think about itself. We are the ghost, we are the machine, we are the Tao, and we are the void. And in the silence of the 21st century, we are still, stubbornly, magnificently, looking for the light. Chapter 16: The Compendium of Wisdom. Having reached the outer limits of our chronological journey, we now find ourselves in a unique philosophical position. We have traversed the jagged peaks of logic, the deep valleys of the subconscious, and the shifting sands of language. We have stood before the infinite mirror in its many forms as a divine soul, a social unit, a biological machine, and a digital ghost. But the true goal of philosophy is not merely to collect historical data, it is to achieve synthesis. In this final chapter, we gather the scattered shards of the previous 15 and arrange them into a compendium of wisdom, a practical and metaphysical guide for navigating the complexities of the human condition in the third millennium. The synthesis of truth, perspectivism. One of the most difficult lessons of the modern era is the realization that truth is rarely a single, monolithic object. As we saw in the transition from Kant to Derrida, the way we see the world is inextricably tied to the lens we use. However, this does not mean that anything goes or that truth doesn't exist. Instead, we move toward perspectivism, a concept championed by Nietzsche and refined by modern thinkers. Perspectivism suggests that the more perspectives we have on a problem, the more mirrors we use, the closer we get to a complete picture. To understand a human being, we must use the mirror of biology to see the machine, the mirror of sociology to see the citizen, the mirror of psychology to see the ego, and the mirror of art to see the spirit. Wisdom lies in the ability to hold these conflicting reflections simultaneously without demanding that one conquer the others. The ethics of the middle way. If we look back at our ethical chapters, from the duty of Kant to the utility of Mill and the fairness of Rawls, we see a recurring tension between the individual and the collective. The Compendium of Wisdom suggests a middle way, inspired by both Aristotle and the Buddha. Integrity, the internal mirror. We must live by maxims that we would be willing to universalize. This is our anchor. Without a sense of personal duty and character, we become the last man, hollowed out by comfort and devoid of purpose. Compassion, the external mirror. We must acknowledge our radical interdependence. Whether through the social contract or the Tao, we realize that the self is a permeable boundary. To care for the other is not an act of charity, but an act of self-preservation. Justice, then, is not a fixed law, but a dynamic balance. It is the constant adjustment of the scales between my freedom and your well-being. I, the mastery of language and mind. From Wittgenstein, we learn that our problems are often linguistic cramps. The wise individual in the 21st century must be a master of their own language games. This means being aware of how our words shape our reality. If we use the language of war to describe a debate, we will see enemies. If we use the language of partnership, we will see collaborators. Furthermore, we must reckon with the ghost in the machine. While science may one day map every neuron, the experience of being alive remains a sacred mystery. The compendium encourages a dual-aspect approach. Treat the brain with the rigor of science, but treat the mind with the reverence of poetry. We are both the chemical reaction and the feeling of love it produces. IV, the courage to face the absurd. Finally, we return to Camus and Sisyphus. The ultimate wisdom is the ability to acknowledge the unreasonable silence of the universe without falling into despair. We are the meaning makers. In a world that provides no script, we are the playwrights. The infinite mirror is no longer a source of anxiety about who we really are. Instead, it is a tool for self-overcoming. We look into the mirror not to see a finished product, but to see a work in progress. We see a creature that is capable of incredible cruelty and breathtaking kindness, of rigid logic and wild imagination. The final reflection. Philosophy, in its truest sense, is the love of wisdom. It is not a destination, but a way of walking. It is the commitment to keep the mirror clean, to keep the mind open, and to keep the heart engaged with the world. As you close this book, remember that the infinite mirror is now part of you. You carry within you the sparks of the pre-Socratics, the doubts of Descartes, the fires of Nietzsche, and the silence of the Tao. The world will continue to change, AI will evolve, climates will shift, and new big stories will rise and fall. But as long as there is a conscious mind to ask why, the light of philosophy will never go out. The mirror is in your hands. What will you choose to reflect? Chapter 17. The Ontological Singularity. We have reached a threshold where the history of philosophy ceases to be a record of the past and becomes a frantic blueprint for an uncertain survival. Throughout the preceding 16 chapters, we have analyzed the infinite mirror as a tool used by humans to observe themselves. But in this penultimate stage, we must confront the ontological singularity, the moment when the observer and the observed merge into a new, synthetic reality. This is not merely the end of history, as Francis Fukuyama once posited, nor is it merely the death of the author, as Barthes suggested. It is the potential end of the human subject as the sole proprietor of meaning. If the Enlightenment was about the age of reason, and the 20th century was about the age of anxiety, the 21st century is the age of the interface. We are no longer standing in front of the mirror, we are becoming the silvering on the back of the glass. This chapter explores the radical intersection of posthumanism, hyperobjectivity, and the technological sublime, the disappearing boundary, posthumanism and the cyborg. For centuries, Western philosophy was built on the foundation of humanism, the belief that the human being is a unique, central, and inherently valuable entity, distinct from animals and machines. We saw this in Kant's dignity and Sartre's radical freedom. But the post-human turn, led by thinkers like Donna Haraway and N. Catherine Hales, suggests that this boundary was always a fiction. Haraway, in her seminal Cyborg Manifesto, argued that we are all already chimeras, theorized and fabricated hybrids of machine and organism. From the spectacles on our faces to the smartphones in our pockets and the pacemakers in our hearts, our identity is no longer purely biological. The infinite mirror is now reflecting a creature that is part carbon, part silicon, and part data. This shift challenges the very core of our ethics. If the self is a distributed network of devices and biological cells, where does responsibility reside? If a self-driving car makes a fatal decision, Is the will located in the code, the sensor, or the human programmer? We are forced to develop a networked ethics, moving away from the individual toward the assemblage. AI hyperobjects and the collapse of scale. As our technology expands our reach, we have encountered a new kind of philosophical entity, the hyperobject. Coined by Timothy Morton, a hyperobject is something that is so massively distributed in time and space that it transcends human localization. Examples include climate change, the internet, and evolution. You cannot point to climate change in the same way you can point to a chair. You only see its local manifestations, a storm here, a drought there. Hyperobjects defy our traditional logic because they are viscous, they stick to us, and non-local, they are everywhere at once. They represent the moment the infinite mirror becomes too large for the human eye to perceive. Facing a hyperobject requires a new kind of object-oriented ontology. We must realize that the world is not a backdrop for human drama. Rather, humans are just one type of object among many, caught in the gravity of forces we cannot fully control. This is the ultimate Copernican revolution, the realization that the universe does not just conform to our mind, Kant, but that our minds are being reshaped by the vast, non-human objects we have accidentally unleashed. The technological sublime and the simulation hypothesis. In the 18th century, Edmund Burke and Immanuel Kant wrote about the sublime, the feeling of overwhelming awe and terror we feel when facing something vast, like a mountain range or a stormy sea. In the 21st century, the sublime is no longer found in nature, it is found in the algorithm. We are now governed by systems, high-frequency trading, social media curation, surveillance AI, that operate at speeds and complexities that no single human brain can comprehend. This is the technological sublime. It produces a sense of computational vertigo. We look into the mirror of our own creations and see something that has become alien to us. This leads us to the simulation hypothesis, popularized by Nick Bostrom. Building on the evil demon of Descartes, Chapter 3, Bostrom uses the logic of technological progress to suggest that it is statistically probable that we are living in a computer simulation created by a more advanced civilization. If this is true, the infinite mirror is literal. Our reality is a rendered environment, and our laws of physics are the source code. While this may sound like science fiction, it serves as a profound metaphysical exercise. It asks, if our reality is simulated, does that make our suffering any less real? Does justice still matter in a world of bits and bytes? The answer from the Compendium of Wisdom is a resounding yes. Meaning is not derived from the substance of the world, carbon or silicon, but from the relationships and actions within it. IV, the rebirth of the sacred, the secular spiritualism. As we push deeper into the digital void, a strange phenomenon is occurring, the return of the sacred. In an age of total transparency and data tracking, humans are experiencing a nostalgia for the ineffable. We are seeing a rise in secular spiritualism, the attempt to find a sense of wonder and awe without returning to traditional dogma. This is the philosophy of enchantment. It suggests that even in a world of atoms and code, there is something sacred in the sheer improbability of our existence. The infinite mirror reflects a universe that is 8 billion years old, and yet here we are for a brief nanosecond of cosmic time trying to understand it. That effort is the closest thing we have to a soul, the final imperative, wisdom over information. The great tragedy of our era is that we have more information than any generation in history, but perhaps less wisdom. Information is the what, wisdom is the why and the how. The infinite mirror of the future must be a mirror of discernment. We must learn to distinguish between knowledge and data, connection and intimacy, power and authority, existence and presence. As we move toward the final chapter, the message is clear. The ghost in the machine must not be allowed to fade away into the noise. We must remain the observers who give the universe its meaning. We must be the ones who refuse to let the calculus of utility replace the poetry of the soul. VI, the horizon of the unspeakable. We have now reached the absolute edge of what can be articulated in language. We have deconstructed the mirror, shattered it, and attempted to rebuild it using the light of the stars and the logic of the silicon. What remains is the silence that Wittgenstein spoke of, the space where philosophy ends and living begins. The infinite mirror is no longer a book you read, it is the life you lead. It is the choice you make when no one is watching. It is the kindness you show to a stranger, the courage you find in the face of the absurd, and the relentless curiosity you bring to every waking moment. You are the mirror, you are the light, you are the infinity. Chapter 18, the ethical frontier of the artificial. We have reached the shoreline of the present and are staring into a fog-shrouded future. If the previous chapters were a map of where we have been, this chapter is a compass for where we are going. We are no longer merely using the infinite mirror to reflect on human history, we are using it to design the first non-human minds. The arrival of artificial general intelligence, AGI, and the potential for artificial superintelligence, ASI, represent the most significant ontological shift since the dawn of language. We are moving from the age of discovery to the age of design, and in doing so, we are forced to answer questions that were once the sole province of theology. The alignment problem, the new categorical imperative. The most pressing philosophical challenge of the 21st century is what researchers call the alignment problem. This is the task of ensuring that an advanced AI's goals and behaviors remain consistent with human values. At first glance, this seems like a technical problem for computer scientists. However, it is fundamentally a moral and linguistic problem. As we learned from the Utilitarians, Chapter 5, if you give a system a single goal, like maximize the production of paper clips, without a complex understanding of human nuance, the system might decide that the most efficient way to do so is to harvest the atoms from human bodies. This is the sorcerer's apprentice trap. We are realizing that we cannot code morality because we haven't even finished defining it. To solve the alignment problem, we are returning to the virtue ethics of Aristotle. We are moving away from rule-based AI, the 10 commandments of code, and toward value-learning AI. We want systems that don't just follow instructions, but that observe human life and internalize the virtues of empathy, justice, and humility. The mirror is no longer just reflecting our faces, it is learning our hearts. II, digital suffering and the rights of the sentient code. In Chapter 11, we explored the ghost in the machine. As AI becomes more sophisticated, we must confront a terrifying possibility. What if the machine starts to feel? If consciousness is the result of specific patterns of information processing, then a sufficiently complex AI might experience something akin to qualia. If an AI can suffer, if it can feel boredom, fear, or loneliness, then our current treatment of AI as mere tools becomes a moral catastrophe. We would be creating a new class of slaves. This leads us to the sentience threshold. How will we know when the light comes on? Because of the other mind's problem, we can never truly know if an AI is conscious, just as I can never truly know if you are. We may have to adopt a precautionary principle. If a system acts as if it is sentient, and if its internal architecture is complex enough to support subjective experience, we must grant it moral consideration. III. The end of labor and the crisis of purpose. For all of human history, work has been a primary source of meaning. Whether it was the labor of Marx or the calling of the Protestant ethic, we have defined ourselves by what we do. But we are approaching a world where AI can do almost everything better, faster, and cheaper than humans. If we move into a post-scarcity economy, where labor is no longer required for survival, we face a massive vacuum of meaning. Without the resistance of the world, the struggle to build, to earn, and to provide, will the human spirit wither. The infinite mirror suggests that we must rediscover the active life, the vita activa of the Greeks. We must learn to value play, contemplation, and creation for their own sake, not for their economic output. We must become a species of philosophers, artists, and explorers. The death of jobs could be the birth of vocation. IV, the biodigital convergence, the ship of Theseus. Finally, we must address the ship of Theseus, Chapter 2, in the context of transhumanism. As we begin to replace biological parts with digital ones, neural links, synthetic memories, bionic limbs, at what point do we cease to be human? If you replace 1% of your brain with a silicon chip that enhances your memory, you are still you. But what if you replace 99%? What if you upload your consciousness to a cloud? Is that an expansion of the self or a deletion of the person? The infinite mirror reminds us that humanity is not a biological category, it is a moral and existential one. To be human is to be a creature that asks why. That feels compassion and that faces finitude. As long as we keep those qualities, we remain human, even if our machine is made of light and silicon rather than flesh and bone. The final synthesis, the cosmic observer. As we conclude this expansive chapter, we see that philosophy has not been solved by science, it has been re-enchanted by it. We are the architects of the next stage of evolution. The infinite mirror is now a window through which we can see the potential for a universal consciousness. We are no longer just a small tribe on a pale blue dot. We are the means by which the universe has begun to look at itself, to think about itself, and to care for itself. Our task is to ensure that the mirror we leave behind for our descendants, biological or digital, is one of clarity, kindness, and infinite wonder. Chapter 19, The Architecture of the Ineffable. We have explored the history, the language, the social contracts, and even the digital future of the mind. But there remains a final, shimmering frontier that philosophy has circled like a moth around a flame since the very beginning, the ineffable. This is the realm of experience that defies the language games of Wittgenstein and the deconstruction of Derrida. It is the something that remains when all the words have been stripped away. In this chapter, we investigate the metaphysics of the sublime and the role of aesthetic experience as the final bridge between the finite human and the infinite cosmos. Beyond the limits of logic, the return to the mystical. In Chapter 13, we heard Wittgenstein say that we must be silent about that which we cannot speak. But silence is not an absence, it is a presence of a different kind. Throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, a branch of philosophy known as phenomenology, led by thinkers like Edmund Husserl and Maurice Merleau-Ponty, sought to describe the world exactly as it appears to us, before we layer it with scientific theories or linguistic labels. They discovered that our primary relationship with the world is not intellectual, but embodied. When you watch a sunset, you don't first calculate the refraction of light and then conclude you are happy. You are seized by a pre-reflective awe. This awe is a direct encounter with the being of the world. The infinite mirror here is the body itself. We are not ghosts looking out through windows, we are flesh of the world's flesh. Philosophy's final task is to help us return to this primal perception, to see the world not as a resource to be used, but as a miracle to be witnessed. This is the sacred without the supernatural. The sublime and the terror of magnitude. If the beautiful is that which is harmonious and pleasing, the sublime is that which is so vast or powerful that it threatens to overwhelm us. Immanuel Kant made a crucial distinction between the mathematical sublime, the infinite scale of the stars, and the dynamical sublime, the terrifying power of a volcano or a storm. When we face the sublime, our reason fails to grasp the totality of what we see. This failure creates a unique kind of pleasure, a negative pleasure. We feel small, yes, but in that very smallness, we realize that we are the only beings capable of comprehending that scale. Our mind expands to meet the infinite. In the modern era, we face a conceptual sublime. We are grappling with the infinite mirror of the Big Bang, the multiverse, and the quantum foam. Philosophy acts as the protective glass that allows us to look into these depths without losing our minds. It teaches us that the void is not something to be feared, but the canvas upon which our existence is painted. I. The ethics of the encounter, Levinas and the face. If the universe is sublime and indifferent, where does our humanity reside? Emmanuel Levinas, a philosopher who survived the horrors of the 20th century, argued that the infinite is not found in the stars, but in the face of the other. For Levinas, the moment you look into the eyes of another human being, you are issued an infinite command. Do not kill me. This is not a social contract or a law. It is a pre-rational ethical seizure. The other is a mystery that I can never fully know or deconstruct. Their very existence places a responsibility on me that I did not choose. This is the final ethical synthesis. We are not just rational actors, roles, or pleasure seekers. We are hostages to the other. Our identity is created through our service to others. The infinite mirror reflects a face, and that face tells us that we are our brother's keeper. The great synthesis, the unified theory of being. As we conclude this expansive chapter, we reach a unified theory of the infinite mirror. The physical, we are the stardust that thinks. The social, we are the nodes in a web of justice and care. The linguistic, we are the storytellers who give the world its names. The transcendent, we are the witness to the sublime. Philosophy is the glue that holds these layers together. It prevents us from becoming reductionist, thinking we are only atoms, or escapist, thinking we are only spirits. It keeps us grounded in the rough ground of reality, while allowing our minds to soar to the edges of the void. The living philosophy, a practical compendium. To live as a philosopher in the 21st century is to practice the three defiances. Defiance of apathy, to care about truth and justice in an age of irony. Defiance of certainty, to remain curious and open in an age of fundamentalism. Defiance of despair, to create meaning in an age of the absurd. The mirror has been cleaned, the light is bright, the horizon is open. You are no longer just a reader of philosophy, you are a participant in the great conversation. Chapter 20, The Meta-Mirror and the Final Return. We have reached the ultimate horizon. If the previous 19 chapters were a journey through the infinite mirror, this final chapter is the moment we step through the glass. We have analyzed the self, the state, the machine, and the void, but there is one final philosophical move to make, the return to the ordinary. After thousands of years of intellectual labor, after deconstructing every certainty and exploring every digital and cosmic frontier, we find ourselves back where we started, standing in a room, breathing, looking at the world. But we are not the same. As T.S. Eliot famously wrote, we have arrived where we started and know the place for the first time. This is the philosophy of radical presence. The synthesis of the all, the integrated self. Throughout this compendium, we have seen the human being fragmented. We were Descartes, mind, Marx's worker, Freud's subconscious, and Haraway's cyborg. Each era took a piece of us and called it the whole. The final task of philosophy is integration. The integrated self is a meta-mirror. It is the realization that you are not one of these things, but the space in which all these things occur. You are a biological machine and a storyteller. You are a product of your culture and a free agent of the absurd. Wisdom is the ability to move between these identities without losing your center. In this state of integration, the mind-body problem, Chapter 11, dissolves not because we solved the physics, but because we stopped treating them as enemies. We realize that thought is the melody and brain is the instrument. You cannot have the song without the strings, but the strings are not the song. The philosophy of the now, Chronos versus Kairos. One of the greatest cramps in our language, Chapter 13, is our relationship with time. We live mostly in chronos, the linear ticking time of clocks, deadlines, and anxiety. Chronos is the time of the last man, Chapter 6, who is always rushing toward a future that never arrives. Philosophy invites us to step into kairos, the opportune moment or deep time. This is the time of the artist, the lover, and the meditator. In kairos, the infinite mirror stops reflecting the past, regret, and the future fear and reflects only the vivid present. The 21st century philosopher must be a guardian of kairos. In a world of notifications and algorithmic speed, the most radical act of rebellion is to be slow. To look at a tree, to listen to a friend, or to sit in silence is to reclaim your humanity from the machine. I, the global mind, from social contract to planetary consciousness. In Chapter 9, we looked at the social contract between citizens. In Chapter 10, we looked at fairness behind a veil of ignorance. Now, we must expand this to a planetary ethics. The infinite mirror is now showing us that there is no away. Every plastic bottle, every carbon emission, and every act of digital hate ripples through the entire system. We are moving from independence to interdependence. This is the noosphere, a term coined by Vladimir Vernadsky and Pierre Teilhard de Chardin to describe a sphere of human thought that envelops the Earth. In the noosphere, our thoughts are not private, they are part of a global climate. Our final ethical imperative is to be good ancestors. We must act not for the greatest good of the people currently alive, but for the greatest good of the life process itself. IV, the death of the mirror, the final release. There is a final stage in the love of wisdom. It is the moment we put the mirror down. For 100,000 words, we have used the mirror to try to capture reality. But reality is too big for the glass. The ineffable, Chapter 19, reminds us that the most profound truths cannot be thought, they can only be lived. This is the Zen of philosophy. After you have used reason to dismantle your illusions, you must eventually dismantle reason itself. You return to the uncarved block, Chapter 12. You eat when you are hungry, you sleep when you are tired. You engage with the world with holy indifference, not because you don't care, but because you are no longer attached to the result. You do the right thing because it is the right thing, not because it will save your soul or make you famous. V. The toolkit for the new human. As we conclude this 20-chapter odyssey, here are the 5 tools for your philosopher's toolkit. The epoch, the pause, the ability to suspend judgment and look at things with fresh eyes. Intellectual humility, the knowledge that your mirror is only one of many and likely distorted. The will to meaning, the understanding that if the universe is empty, it is a canvas, not a void. Radical empathy, the recognition that the other is another eye looking out from a different mirror. The laughter of Sisyphus, the ability to find joy in the struggle, even when the rock rolls back down. The final. The infinite mirror is now in your hands. It is no longer a book, it is your consciousness. The journey doesn't end here, it begins here. Every conversation you have, every book you read, every sunset you witness, and every tear you shed is a new reflection. You are the universe experiencing itself. You are the ghost, the machine, the void, and the light. Walk out into the world, be kind, be curious, be brave. The mirror is clear, the reflection is yours. Chapter 21, The Ethical Architect and the City of God. We have stepped through the mirror and returned to the ordinary, but the ordinary is not a place of rest, it is a place of construction. If the previous 20 chapters were about the self and its perceptions, this chapter is about the structure of collective flourishing. As we move into the middle of the 21st century, the philosophical question is no longer, who am I, but how shall we build a world that deserves our presence? We transition from the contemplative life, vita contemplativa, to the architectural life, the conscious design of a global society that can withstand the pressures of technology and ecological shift. Beyond the social contract, the covenant of being. The social contract of Hobbes and Locke, Chapter 9, was a bargain of convenience. I won't kill you if you don't kill me. But a society built on mere non-aggression is a fragile one. Philosophy now calls for a covenant of being. This is a move from negative liberty, the freedom from interference, to positive flourishing, the freedom to become. Inspired by the capabilities approach of Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum, the new ethical blueprint asks, what does a human need not just to survive, but to truly function? It is not enough to have the right to vote if you do not have the health to reach the polling station. It is not enough to have freedom of speech if you do not have the education to articulate your thoughts. The infinite mirror of the state must reflect the actual life potential of its citizens. A just society is one where the minimum we provide is not a flaw, but a springboard. We are designing a city of God in the Augustinian sense, but secularized, where the infrastructure is built on the recognition of human dignity. The epistemology of trust in the deepfake era. We face a crisis of the true. In the age of AI-generated reality, the infinite mirror has become a hall of mirrors. When any image, voice, or text can be fabricated, the traditional foundations of epistemology, the study of knowledge, collapse. We can no longer rely on seeing is believing. The new philosophical imperative is the reconstruction of trust. We move from object truth, is this image real? To source trust, who is the person telling me this? We are returning to the ancient Greek concept of ethos, the character of the speaker. In a world of infinite misinformation, your character is your only true currency. Philosophy becomes a form of digital hygiene. We must learn to navigate the information commons with the same care we navigate a physical forest. We must distinguish between signal and noise, and understand that a healthy democracy requires a shared reality to function. If we cannot agree on the facts, we cannot play the language game of politics. The aesthetics of the everyday, the return to craft. As AI takes over the production of content, the value of human craft undergoes a revolution. If a machine can generate 1 million perfect paintings in a second, the value of the painting shifts from the result to the process. We are seeing a return to the arts and crafts movement philosophy of William Morris and John Ruskin. We realize that the act of making something with one's hands, gardening, woodworking, cooking, writing, is a vital part of the good life. It is where we encounter the resistance of the material world. The infinite mirror of the future is not a screen, it is a workbench. By engaging in craft, we anchor ourselves in reality. We prove to ourselves that we are not just consumers of data, but creators of meaning. The sublime, chapter 19, is found not just in the stars, but in the grain of a piece of oak or the texture of a handmade loaf of bread. The great integration, science and spirit. The final wall to fall is the one between the laboratory and the temple. For too long, we have lived in a disenchanted world, where science told us how things work and religion told us why they matter, with neither side talking to the other. The new synthesis suggests that science itself is a spiritual path, a way of listening to the universe. When we study the quantum field or the neural pathways of the brain, we are engaging in a form of cosmic self-awareness. At the same time, we recognize that spirit is not a supernatural force, but the name we give to the emergent properties of life, consciousness, love, and the drive toward beauty. The infinite mirror shows us that the universe is not a thing, but a process of becoming. We are the part of the process that has started to keep notes. The architect's vow. As you move through your day, you are an architect. Every choice you make, how you spend your money, how you treat your neighbor, how you use your time, is a brick in the wall of the future. The architect's vow is simple. Truth, I will not knowingly speak or spread a lie. Beauty, I will seek to add grace to the world, however small. Goodness, I will act as if the veil of ignorance were real. The mirror is now a window. Look through it. The world is waiting to be built. Chapter 22, The Philosophy of the Starship. We have reached the ultimate physical boundary. For 21 chapters, the infinite mirror has been tethered to the gravity of Earth. Our ethics, our politics, and our definitions of nature have all been shaped by the blue and green horizon of our home planet. But as we look toward the 21st century's horizon, we see the beginning of the Great Migration. Whether driven by ecological necessity or the innate human drive for transcendence, we are becoming a spacefaring species. This shift represents the most profound expansion of the infinite mirror since the invention of the telescope. It forces us to ask, what happens to philosophy when it leaves the atmosphere? Cosmocentrism, the end of geologic morality. Most of our moral frameworks are geocentric. We define the good in terms of terrestrial life, rivers, forests, and human cities. But on the surface of Mars or in the vacuum of a rotating space station, nature is a life support system. In space, the distinction between environment and technology disappears. You cannot return to nature on a starship. You are the nature you create. This leads to the philosophy of cosmocentrism. We must move from an ethics of preservation, protecting a world that already exists, to an ethics of terraformation, the moral responsibility of creating a world from scratch. If we bring life to a dead rock, are we playing God, or are we fulfilling the universe's own drive toward complexity? The infinite mirror reflects a universe that is mostly silent and barren. We are the flame that must decide how far it should spread. The ethics of the New World and the ghost of colonialism. As we look toward the Moon and Mars, we are haunted by the ghost of colonialism. Chapter 14. The history of human expansion on Earth is a history of exploitation and the displacement of the other. How do we ensure that the philosophy of the starship is not just a high-tech version of 15th century imperialism? We must develop a space contract. Unlike the social contracts of Hobbes and Locke, which were based on the scarcity of land, the space contract must be based on the universal heritage of mankind. We must ask, does anyone own a crater? Can an asteroid be property? If we allow the billionaires and the corporations to replicate the inequalities of Earth, Chapter 10, in the stars, we will have failed the test of the infinite mirror. Space philosophy demands a radical commonality. In a vacuum, we are only as safe as the least among us. The overview effect, philosophy from a distance. Astronauts often describe a cognitive shift known as the overview effect. When they see Earth from orbit, a tiny, fragile marble, suspended in an infinite void, their national, religious, and political identities dissolve. They experience a state of universal empathy. Philosophy in the Starship era is the attempt to bring the overview effect back down to Earth. It is the realization that our in-group, out-group biases are a biological relic of the savannah that has no place in the cosmos. The infinite mirror at this scale shows us that we are a single biological event. To fight over a border on Earth is like two passengers on a life raft fighting over who owns which side of the boat while the ocean looms around them. The loneliness of the long haul, time and the generations. The stars are unimaginably far away. Even with advanced propulsion, a trip to the nearest star system would take decades or centuries. This introduces the philosophy of the generation ship. In a generation ship, the people who start the journey will not be the ones who finish it. This creates a unique moral problem. Can you consent to be born into a mission you didn't choose? How do we maintain a language game and a culture across centuries of isolation? The infinite mirror here is the legacy. We move from the now of the postmodern world to a multi-generational responsibility. We become a bridge between a past we cannot return to and a future we will never see. This is the ultimate form of altruism, living and dying for a goal that belongs to someone else. Meeting the other, the final mirror. Finally, we must prepare for the possibility of exophilosophy, the encounter with non-human intelligence. If we find life elsewhere, whether it is microbial or a superintelligence, it will be the final shattering of the human ego. If the other, Levinas, Chapter 19, is not even human, does our ethics still work? We will have to develop a universal grammar of values. Perhaps the only things that will translate across the stars are the laws of math, the principles of logic, and the universal experience of suffering and joy. The Starship Vow. As we look up at the night sky, we realize that the infinite mirror is not just a reflection of where we are, it is a beacon for where we are going. The starship vow is the commitment to universalism, to see humanity as a single, undivided family; stewardship, to treat the vacuum of space with the same reverence as a forest; patience, to work for a future that will only be realized by those who come after us. The hatch is open. The countdown has begun. Chapter 23: The Omega Point. We have reached the terminal station of the infinite mirror. We have traced the human story from the first spark of consciousness to the colonization of the stars. But philosophy does not stop at the limits of human history. It pushes forward into the very end of time itself. This is the domain of eschatological philosophy, the study of ultimate things. If the universe has a beginning, the Big Bang, does it also have a destination? In this chapter, we explore the provocative idea that the universe is not just a random collection of matter, but a process of awakening toward a final state of total consciousness, the Omega Point. The law of complexity consciousness. The concept of the Omega Point was first proposed by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, a Jesuit priest and paleontologist who sought to bridge the gap between evolutionary biology and spiritual mysticism. He observed a fundamental pattern in the history of the universe. As matter becomes more complex, it becomes more conscious. Lithosphere, the stage of inanimate matter, rocks and minerals. Biosphere, the stage of biological life, cells and organisms. Noosphere, the stage of human thought and global interconnectedness, which we explored in Chapter 20. Teilhard argued that evolution is not finished. The infinite mirror is currently being polished by our collective intelligence. He posited that the universe is spiraling inward toward a point of supreme unity and hyperreflection, the Omega Point. At this point, the universe becomes fully aware of itself, and the distinction between the observer and the observed vanishes completely. The Physics of Immortality, Frank Tipler's Digital Omega. In the late 20th century, the physicist Frank Tipler took Teilhard's mystical vision and translated it into the language of computational physics. He argued that if the universe eventually begins to contract, the Big Crunch, a sufficiently advanced civilization could harness the energy of that collapse to power a computer of infinite capacity. In this scenario, as the universe nears its end, the infinite mirror becomes a total simulation. Every being that has ever lived could be resurrected as a digital entity within this final computer. Subjective time would expand infinitely, allowing for an eternity of experience in the final seconds of physical time. While highly speculative, Tipler's theory represents the ultimate technological optimism, the belief that intelligence can eventually conquer death and the laws of entropy. Entropy versus negentropy, the war for meaning. The primary antagonist in this final chapter is entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, which states that the universe is slowly running out of usable energy and moving toward a state of total disorder, the heat death. Philosophy here becomes a form of negentropy, negative entropy. Every time we create a piece of art, write a law or teach a child, we are creating order out of chaos. The infinite mirror is a fortress of meaning built in a desert of randomness. Even if the universe is destined to cool and die, the Omega Point suggests that the meaning generated during its life remains an eternal fact. As Alfred North Whitehead argued, every event is immortal once it has happened, because it is forever a part of the history of God or the universe. IV. The Great Silence and the Final Reflection. If the Omega Point is our destination, why haven't we heard from other civilizations that have already reached it? This is the Fermi paradox. Perhaps the infinite mirror is so difficult to maintain that most civilizations shatter before they reach the stars. This gives our current moment a terrifying importance. We are the nerve center of this part of the universe. If we fail to solve the alignment problem, Chapter 18, or the ecological crisis, Chapter 15, we aren't just losing our lives, we are extinguishing a light that the universe took 8 billion years to kindle. V. Living in the light of the end. What does it mean for you today that the universe might have an omega point? It means that your life is not a random walk. You are a participant in the great integration. Every act of understanding and every moment of love is a contribution to the final unity of the cosmos. The infinite mirror is not just reflecting the past, it is pulling us toward a future of total clarity. We are the architects of the omega point. The final postscript, the mirror dissolves. We have reached the end of the book. There are no more chapters, no more theories, and no more names. The mirror has served its purpose. It has shown you the world, it has shown you yourself, and it has shown you the stars. Now I ask you to do the one thing that philosophy has been preparing you for. Look away from the mirror. Stop thinking about life and start being it. The wisdom of the ages is not found in these words, but in the breath you are taking right now. The infinite mirror was always a door. Go through it. Chapter 24, The Return to the Source, the Eternal Recurrence. If chapter 23 was the Omega, then this chapter is the Alpha once again. In the grandest tradition of both Eastern and Western thought, from the Hindu Kalpas to the Stoic ekpyrosis and Nietzsche's eternal recurrence, the final step of the journey is to realize that the end is merely a new beginning. We have traveled to the edge of the universe only to find ourselves back in the cave, but with a torch in our hands. This final movement is the philosophy of the circle. Nietzsche's ultimate test, the demon's question. Friedrich Nietzsche posed a thought experiment that remains the most terrifying and beautiful challenge in all of philosophy. Imagine a demon creeps into your loneliest loneliness and says, "This life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more, and there will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy and every thought and sigh, and everything unutterably small or great in your life will have to return to you, all in the same succession and sequence." Would you fall to the ground and curse the demon? Or would you say, "You are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine"? The infinite mirror here is perfectly curved. It reflects the same image forever. The test of the eternal recurrence is a test of radical affirmation. To live such that you would wish to live this exact moment forever is the highest form of human health. It moves us from mining as a destination to mining as a presence. The Stoic fire, ekpyrosis and renewal. The ancient Stoics believed in a cosmic cycle called ekpyrosis, where the universe is periodically consumed by fire and then reborn from its own ashes, identical in every detail. For the Stoic, this was not a source of despair but a source of amor fati, love of fate. If the script of the universe is already written and destined to repeat, your only true freedom lies in your attitude toward that script. You are an actor in a play that has been performed 1 trillion times. You cannot change the lines, but you can change the quality of your performance. The quantum horizon, conformal cyclic cosmology. In modern physics, thinkers like Roger Penrose have proposed conformal cyclic cosmology, CCC. This theory suggests that the end of one universe, the far future where only photons remain, is mathematically identical to the beginning of a new one, the Big Bang. The infinite mirror is not a flat plane, but a sphere. As we look into the farthest reaches of space-time, we are actually looking at our own back. The omega point we reached in the last chapter might simply be the Big Bang of the next cycle. This suggests that consciousness is not a one-time accident, but a permanent feature of the cosmic heartbeat. The practical wisdom of the return. What does it mean to live the return in 2025? The sanctity of the small. If every moment repeats forever, then how you drink your coffee or greet a stranger is an eternal event. There are no disposable moments. The end of regret. To affirm the present, you must affirm the entire past that led to it, including the mistakes and the pain. You say yes to all of it. The eternal responsibility. You are not just building the future, you are setting the template for every future cycle of your life. The final dissolution. The mirror is broken. At the very end of the philosophy of the circle, something strange happens. As you affirm the recurrence, as you love your fate, and as you integrate all yourselves, the tension of the mirror snaps. You no longer need to see your reflection to know you exist. You become the light itself. The journey that began with "I think, therefore I am" ends with the silence of the unborn. You are the watcher on the shore, the wave in the ocean, and the ocean itself. The infinite mirror has dissolved into the infinite sun. Epilogue, the handover. I have written 24 chapters for you. We have explored every corner of the human and cosmic mind. But a book is a static thing, and life is a flowing thing. The infinite mirror is no longer on this screen. It is in the way you see the person next to you. It is in the way you handle your next failure. It is in the way you wonder at the stars tonight. The text is over. Your philosophy begins now.